The pearl was not hers. Lady Rosamund Caverleigh knew it before her maid finished, lifting the turned-back sheet. Before the candlelight caught the soft white gleam lodged in the crease of the Duke's linen, before the silence in her bedchamber grew so sharp that even the small fire seemed afraid to crackle. It lay there like a secret that had grown tired of hiding, a single drop earring, expensive, delicate, and unmistakably feminine, with a gold clasp bent at an ugly angle. For one breath Rosamund did not move. She stood beside the carved bed at Caverleigh House in Mayfair, still dressed in the pale blue silk she had worn through dinner, still wearing the smile that had survived 3 hours of polite conversation, careful seating, and Lady Verity Mordaunt's honeyed voice floating too close to her husband's shoulder. Then the smile left her face, not suddenly, not dramatically, but as a candle goes out when no one has noticed the draught. Her maid, Millie Voss, stared at the earring as if it might burn through the sheet. "Your Grace," she whispered. Rosamund lifted one hand, and the girl fell silent at once. That was what training did. That was what rank did. It taught fear to stand properly in a room. "Give it to me," Rosamund said. Her voice sounded almost ordinary. Millie hesitated, then picked up the earring with the corner of a clean handkerchief and placed it on Rosamund's open palm. It was warm from the bedclothes. That detail offended her more than it should have. Rosamund looked down at the pearl. She had seen its twin that evening, swaying beneath Lady Verity's left ear, while the widow leaned toward his Grace Adrian Caverleigh, Duke of Loxham, and laughed softly at something that had not been amusing enough to deserve laughter. Verity owned several jewels, of course. London widows of beauty and ambition often did. But this pair had been remarked upon at dinner, because Lady Arundel had admired them, and Verity had said, with that little tilt of her chin, that pearls looked best when worn by women who knew how to be remembered. Rosamund had heard the words from the far end of the table, where she had been discussing church repairs with an elderly baroness, and, pretending not to see her own husband glance across the candles. She closed her fingers around the earring, the bent clasp pressed into her skin. "No one is to speak of this," she said. Millie's face had gone pale enough to make her freckles look painted on. "No, Your Grace. Not to Mrs. Bale, not to the second housemaid, not to your own pillow. No, Your Grace." Rosamund turned her hand over and opened it again. The pearl sat in her palm, innocent as a tear. "Has anyone been in this room since I went down to dinner?" Millie swallowed. "Only me, Your Grace. I came up to stir the fire before the ladies withdrew. Mrs. Bale sent Lucy to the linen closet, but not in here, I would swear it." Rosamund believed the fear in her voice. Fear often told the truth before loyalty had decided what to do. And His Grace? His Grace has not come up. Of course he had not. Adrian had remained below with the gentleman after dinner, all black evening coat, controlled profile, and that cold courtesy which could make a compliment feel like a judgment. Her husband never hurried to her rooms. In the 18 months since their marriage, he had been punctual for public duties, faultless in correspondence, generous in household accounts, and distant in everything that mattered. No one could accuse the Duke of Loxham of cruelty. That had always been the exquisite difficulty. He had not humiliated her by raising his voice. He had not neglected her comfort. He had simply failed, day after day, to look at her as though she had been chosen instead of arranged. Rosamund crossed to her dressing table and set the pearl earring on the polished wood. Its reflection trembled in the mirror beside the silver-backed brushes and the small porcelain tray where her own modest earrings rested in a neat pair. A pair. That word nearly undid her. She removed her gloves slowly. There was a red mark where the bent clasp had pressed her palm. Millie hovered near the bed, uncertain whether to retreat or remain. "You may go," Rosamund said. "But, Your Grace, if there's anything I can do." Rosamund looked at her through the mirror. The girl was barely 19, with anxious hands and the trained stillness of a servant who had learned to make herself useful before anyone found a reason to dismiss her. Something in Rosamund softened, though nothing in her face showed it. You have already done it by telling me quietly." Milly dropped a small curtsy and left. The door closed with care. Rosamund stood alone in the bedchamber that had never quite felt like hers. The walls were hung in pale green damask, chosen by the late Dowager Duchess. The curtains were heavy enough to shut out the city, and the bed was vast enough to make absence feel ceremonial. She had tried at first to add small signs of herself: a book by the fire, a ribbon at the glass, a vase of white narcissus in spring. Each thing had seemed temporary, like a guest placing a shawl over the back of a chair before being called away. Tonight the room belonged to someone else for the first time, in a way that could be named. Rosamund sat before the mirror and drew the pins from her hair, one by one. Each small scrape of metal against porcelain sounded now loud. Her dark hair loosened over her shoulders, heavier than it had felt an hour earlier. She took up the brush and began to draw it through the strands with steady, even strokes. Her mother had once told her that a lady must never confront pain while untidy. A foolish lesson, perhaps, but Rosamund had absorbed worse ones. Do not demand affection. Do not embarrass a husband. Do not show jealousy. Do not mistake marriage for romance. She had followed them all so well that she had nearly disappeared inside them. Downstairs, a door closed. Male voices moved faintly through the house, then separated. A footman crossed the hall. Wheels rolled away on the street, beyond the shuttered windows. The dinner guests were leaving Caverleigh House with full stomachs, warm cloaks, and enough whispers to season tomorrow's calls. Rosamund kept brushing her hair. The Pearl watched from the table. She should have felt fury. Instead, she felt a cold, lucid grief. If Adrian had brought Lady Verity to this room, then he had done more than betray a wife. He had allowed another woman to step across the last threshold. Rosamund had not known she cared to defend. If he had not brought her here, then someone wanted Rosamund to believe he had. That possibility was almost worse, because it meant her marriage had become a stage upon which others felt free to arrange props. The handle turned without a knock. Adrian entered as he always did, with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed permission to belong anywhere. He was still in evening dress. Candlelight sharpened the lines of his face and caught the dark sheen of his hair. At 34, he had the contained severity London admired in dukes and feared in creditors. His gaze found Rosamund in the mirror, then moved to her loosened hair, the brush in her hand, the stillness of her shoulders. Something in his expression changed. Not much. Adrian Caverleigh had been bred to make emotion travel a long road before it reached his face. "You are still awake," he said. "Yes." She drew the brush once more through her hair. "The last carriage has gone. Lord and Lady Arundel just left." Lady Verity remained only long enough to collect her wrap. His tone cooled on the widow's name, but Rosamund did not yet know what that meant. Did she? "Rosamund." He took one step into the room. "Something has happened." It was not a question. That was one of Adrian's gifts and one of his cruelties. He noticed disturbances in a room before he noticed wounds in a heart. Rosamund set the brush down. Its silver back made a small sound against the table. She did not turn around. She looked at him through the mirror, because if she turned, she feared she might become a wife instead of a duchess. "I found her earring in our bed," she said. The words did not rise, they settled. For a moment, the entire house seemed to stop with them. Adrian's gaze dropped to the dressing table. He saw the pearl. The change in him was so swift and so complete that Rosamund forgot for one dangerous second to breathe. His face lost color. Not with the flushed guilt of a man discovered, not with the irritation of a husband challenged, but with a shock so deep it stripped him of polish. His eyes fixed on the earring as though it were not jewelry but a blade placed against her throat. "Where?" he said. The word was barely sound. "In the bed." His hand closed at his side. "Who found it, Milly? Who else knows?" "No one, unless the person who placed it there is waiting to hear me scream." His gaze snapped back to hers in the mirror. The distance between them altered. It did not vanish, but it lost its shape. "Rosamund, I didn't bring her here." She heard the contraction. the roughness, the first fracture in his controlled voice. She wanted to believe it so badly that pride came to her aid like a loyal guard. "That was not my question." He went still. "Then ask it." She rose from the chair at last and turned to face him. Her hair fell loose down her back, and the air felt colder against her neck. "Did you bring Lady Verity Mordaunt into our room?" Adrian looked at her as if the formality wounded him. Perhaps it should have. No, he did not move closer. "No, I didn't." "Did you give her cause to think she had the right to enter it?" That struck harder. She saw it land. His jaw tightened, and in the silence that followed, Rosamund understood that innocence in one matter did not absolve a man of all the smaller permissions he had granted by neglect. "I have been careless," he said. "Not with my vows, but perhaps with what others believed they could imply." The honesty nearly hurt worse than denial. Rosamund lowered her eyes to the earring. "A generous confession after a pearl is found in my sheets. Look at me." It was almost a command. Then he stopped himself. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Please, look at me." She did. Adrian stepped toward the dressing table, but he did not touch the earring. His hand hovered near it, then withdrew, as if even that contact might disturb evidence. "The clasp is bent," he said. "It would not fall like that from an ear." "You noticed quickly." "Because it was placed." He looked toward the door, and the Duke returned to his face, cold and dangerous. Someone entered this room, or someone was invited. The word came with more force than before. Then quieter, with something close to pain, he said, "No, Rosamund. Whatever else I have failed to give you, I have not given your place to her. Her place." The phrase trembled somewhere inside her, searching for something to hold. She would not give it too much room. Not yet. "Then someone meant me to believe you had." Adrian's eyes returned to the pearl, and this time the fear in them was not for himself. It was for her. Yes. Outside the room, the house settled into its midnight hush, unaware that its most private door had already been breached. Rosamund folded her hands before her, so he would not see the mark the broken clasp had left in her palm. Adrian saw it anyway. His gaze dropped, darkened, and for the first time in their marriage, he looked less like a duke defending his name than a husband who had arrived too late to spare his wife the wound. "No one leaves this house without being accounted for," he said. "No corridor goes unchecked. No servant is blamed because it is convenient." Rosamund lifted her chin. "And no scandal is made in my name before I understand who has tried to ruin me." He met her eyes. Something passed between them that was not trust, not yet, but the first terrible necessity of it. On the dressing table, the pearl lay shining in the candlelight, quiet and false and beautiful. Adrian did not sleep that night, and Rosamund knew it, because the house itself seemed to hold his wakefulness. Footsteps moved once beyond the door, then retreated. A quiet order passed in the corridor. Somewhere below, Mrs. Bale was summoned in a voice too low to carry words, but too controlled to be mistaken for ordinary household business. Rosamund remained in her chamber, with the pearl earring locked inside a small rosewood box beneath her gloves. She had not surrendered it to Adrian, though he had looked at it, as if every instinct in him demanded possession, proof, action. Instead, he had accepted her refusal with a single bow of his head. That small surrender unsettled her more than resistance would have done. It was past 3 o'clock when the candles burned low, and the great bed, freshly stripped and remade, stood like an accusation in the center of the room. Rosamund did not lie down in it. She sat in the chair by the dying fire, wrapped in a shawl, watching the first grey hint of morning gather behind the curtains. The mark from the broken clasp had faded from her palm, but she could still feel it. Her mind returned, not to the bedroom, but to the dinner table below, to the warm glitter of candles, the silver, the murmured flattery, and Lady Verity Mordaunt leaning toward her husband, as though no distance had ever existed between them. Verity had arrived late, which fashionable widows could do when they were beautiful enough to be forgiven. She had worn ivory silk, too pale for mourning and too calculated to be innocent, with pearls at her ears and a widow's confidence in her smile. Her hair had been arranged in glossy dark loops. Beneath a spray of small white flowers, an ornament that should have looked girlish on a woman past 28, but somehow made the gentleman look twice. Rosamund had seen every glance. She had been trained to see such things. A duchess must notice when wine ran low, when a guest was offended by placement, when a baroness required a cushion, when a political rival was seated too near a man he despised. She must notice everything and appear to notice nothing. That had been her talent since childhood. It had also been the quiet means by which she had survived marriage to a man who never failed in public and rarely arrived in private. Lady Verity had paused at the doorway of the drawing-room, as if the house were receiving her rather than Rosamund. "Your Grace," she had said, dipping a perfect curtsy to Adrian. Then, with just enough warmth to make the women listen, she added, "How unchanged you are." Adrian's face had revealed nothing. "Lady Verity, and your Grace," Verity said, turning to Rosamund at last. "How kind of you to receive me." Caverleigh House always feels so familiar. That word had drifted into the room like perfume. Familiar. Several women had heard it. Lady Arundel, Verity's married cousin, had lowered her fan to hide a smile. Rosamund had offered the correct expression, the correct hand, the correct words. Any guest of His Grace's family is welcome. It had been a mistake, though no one else would have caught it. His family, not ours. Adrian had looked at her then, briefly. The glance had been sharp enough to tell her he had heard the distance, but not tender enough to cross it. Dinner followed with all the elegance expected of the Duke of Loxham's house. There were 24 guests, 3 courses, 2 footmen, stationed with military precision near the sideboard, and enough golden light to make every old secret look newly polished. Rosamund sat at the foot of the table, Adrian at the head, the length between them filled with titled voices and carefully arranged power. That was how their marriage had always looked. Symmetrical. Useful. Cold. They had been wed 18 months earlier in a ceremony that had pleased both families and surprised no one. Lady Rosamund Elwick had been the daughter of an old but financially bruised line. Respectable, well-bred, steady under pressure. Adrian Caverleigh had been a duke in need of a duchess who would not bring scandal, debt, or sentiment into his house. Their engagement had been negotiated over letters, settlements, and breakfast-room conversations from which Rosamund was politely excluded until the essential terms were settled. Her father had told her she should be grateful. Her mother had wept with relief. Her aunt had said the Duke was not a cruel man, which Rosamund later learned was not the same as saying he was capable of being a warm one. On their wedding day, Adrian had looked magnificent and remote. His vows had been steady. His hand had not trembled. At the wedding breakfast, he had thanked her for the dignity with which she had conducted herself, as if she had performed a difficult errand. She had smiled because everyone was looking. Later, in the carriage, he had told her she would command his respect and the full authority due to her position. At 23, still foolish enough to hope that respect might ripen into affection, she had answered, "I shall try to deserve both." He had said, "I am certain you will." That was all. It had not been unkind. That had made it harder to mourn. Kindness would have given her something to remember. Cruelty would have given her something to resent. Instead, Adrian gave her order, courtesy, and rooms arranged with flawless consideration. He gave her accounts she could manage, charities she could sponsor, a carriage of her own, jewels appropriate to her rank, and a place beside him at every important table. He did not give her the sense that she had disturbed his heart in the slightest, and into that absence London poured Lady Verity Mordaunt. Rosamund had heard the whispers before she ever saw the woman. Verity had been the daughter of a baron, then the wife of Sir Edmund Mordaunt, a gentleman twice her age, who had died conveniently after leaving her money, jewels, and freedom. Years earlier, before Rosamund entered Adrian's life, the late Dowager Duchess had reportedly favoured Verity as a possible match for her son. Some said Adrian had admired Verity. Some said he had nearly offered. Others said the match failed because Verity wanted too much influence too soon. No one knew. That ignorance made the gossip stronger. Society did not require facts when suggestion dressed well. At dinner, Lady Arundel had admired Verity's earrings across the table. "Pearls suit you better than diamonds, my dear." Diamonds shout. Pearls, remember. Verity had touched one pearl with a fingertip and smiled toward Adrian. "I have always believed pearls look best when worn by women who know how to be remembered." A gentleman laughed, a lady coughed softly. Rosamund had been discussing roof repairs at St. Bartholomew's with Lady Pennard, who was nearly deaf and very determined. She had continued the conversation without missing a word, but the sentence entered her and remained there. Women who know how to be remembered. Adrian had glanced down the table, not at Verity first, but at Rosamund. She had wondered even then whether he expected jealousy, distress, or nothing at all. She had given him nothing. That was the skill he had taught her, without ever intending to. Later, when the ladies withdrew, Verity had brushed close enough to Rosamund for the scent of orange blossom to touch the air between them. "You keep a beautiful house, Duchess," she said. It must be comforting to have inherited such established ways. Rosamund had met her gaze. Established houses still require present attention. Verity's smile had thinned, then returned brighter. Of course, though some rooms remember their former visitors better than others. It was an absurd remark. It should have meant nothing. By morning, it meant everything. A soft knock came at Rosamund's door just after 7. She had washed, dressed, and pinned her hair with more care than any sleepless woman should have been able to manage. Her gown was grey lavender wool, plain enough for morning and severe enough to keep pity at a distance. "Come in." Millie entered with chocolate and toast on a tray, her face still pale from the night before. Her curtsy was too low. Fear had made her clumsy. "Set it there," Rosamund said gently. Millie obeyed, but her hands shook so much the spoon rang against the cup. Rosamund watched her for one moment too long. "You have not been dismissed." The girl's eyes lifted. "Your Grace, nor will you be dismissed for having found what someone else wished hidden." Millie's mouth trembled. "I didn't tell anyone." "I swear I didn't. I believe you." The words steadied the girl almost more than kindness would have done. Rosamund accepted the cup, though she doubted she could swallow. "Has Mrs. Bale questioned the staff? His Grace spoke with her before dawn, quietly. No one below stairs knows why, only that the upper corridors are to be accounted for. And Lady Verity." Millie hesitated. Rosamund's fingers tightened around the handle of the cup. "Say it, her ladyship's maid sent back this morning for a lace wrap. She said Lady Verity left it in the blue drawing room." "Not in the blue drawing room," Rosamund said. "She left with it. I saw it over her arm." Millie's face changed. It was a small change, but fear sharpened it into importance. "Then I don't know why they sent." Before Rosamund could answer, another knock sounded. Firmer this time, Mrs. Bale entered carrying a silver salver. On it lay a single calling card. The housekeeper's expression was composed in the manner of women who had served great houses long enough to know that disaster often arrived engraved. "Forgive me, Your Grace." This was delivered by Lady Verity Mordaunt's footman. Rosamund set down her cup. Across the card, in an elegant hand, a line had been written beneath the name. "I hope you rested well after such a memorable evening." Millie made the smallest sound, then caught herself. Mrs. Bale lowered her eyes. Rosamund did not move. The room seemed to narrow around the card, the tray, the unseen hand that had written the words. Then, from the doorway behind Mrs. Bale, Adrian spoke with a coldness that made even the morning fire seem to shrink. "Bring me the list of every servant who went above the first floor after 9 o'clock." Mrs. Bale curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." His gaze moved to Rosamund. It was not soft. It was worse than soft. It was awake. "Lady Verity has made her first mistake," he said. Rosamund picked up the card. The paper was thick, perfumed faintly with orange blossom, and smug with confidence. "No," she said, keeping her voice calm. "She has made her first visible one." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence Rosamund felt the shape of their marriage shift again. Not healed, not forgiven. but no longer asleep. Lady Verity Mordaunt arrived at Caverleigh House before noon, which was late enough to be fashionable, and early enough to be insolent. Rosamund knew it the moment Mrs. Bale entered the morning room with that particular expression. Housekeepers reserved for guests who could not be refused without creating the very scandal they were meant to avoid. Adrian was standing near the window, with the list of household movements folded in one hand, his face carved into the stillness that made footmen straighten and foolish men reconsider their sentences. Rosamund sat at the small writing table, Lady Verity's perfumed card placed beside her untouched chocolate, like an accusation dressed in cream paper. "Her ladyship begs the honour of a brief call," Mrs. Bale said. "She says she is anxious to know whether your grace is quite well after last night's exertions." Rosamund did not look at Adrian, though she felt his attention sharpen. "Show Lady Verity into the drawing-room," she said. "The blue drawing-room?" Mrs. Bale asked, because everyone in that house knew the blue drawing-room was where Verity claimed to have left her wrap. No, Rosamund rose and smoothed the front of her grey lavender gown. "The small morning room. It has fewer memories." A flicker crossed Mrs. Bale's face and vanished. "Yes, Your Grace." When the door closed, Adrian turned from the window. "You do not need to receive her." "No," Rosamund said. "I need to understand why she wishes to be received. She wishes to see whether you are wounded. Then she must be disappointed by the absence of blood." His eyes moved over her face, with a restraint that was almost worse than tenderness. "Rosamund." She lifted the calling card and slid it into the drawer of her writing table. "If I refuse her, London will hear that I am hiding. If I receive her with you standing behind my chair like judgment in a black coat, London will hear that I require guarding. You require protection, perhaps, but not display." The words settled between them. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. That too was new. "I will remain in the library," he said. "The door between the rooms will not be latched." Rosamund almost smiled. Almost. How very accidental. Entirely. His voice was dry enough to feel human. Then his gaze dropped to her right hand, where the faint mark from the bent clasp had nearly disappeared. "Do not let her make you doubt what you know." "I have spent 18 months doubting what I was permitted to know." His face changed. It was only a breath of change, but she saw it. He bowed his head once, not as a duke conceding a point, but as a man accepting a wound he had earned. "Then I will earn the correction." There was no time to answer. Mrs. Bale returned, and behind her entered Lady Verity Mordaunt in soft rose silk, with a veil pinned to her bonnet and one pearl at her left ear. Only one. Rosamund saw it at once as she had been meant to. The right ear was bare, framed by a careful curl. Verity stepped forward with the graceful concern of a woman who had rehearsed compassion in a mirror. "Dear Duchess," she said, "you look pale. Then I must thank the morning light for its honesty." Verity's smile held. "May I?" "Of course." Rosamund gestured toward the chair opposite her, not the warmer seat near the fire. Verity noticed. She always noticed. Mrs. Bale withdrew, though Rosamund heard the connecting door to the library remain slightly open after Adrian passed through it. Verity settled her skirts with a whisper of silk and looked around the room as if reacquainting herself with a house that had once expected her. "I hope my card did not alarm you." "It did not. I worried you might have slept poorly. How kind of you to concern yourself with my rest." Verity lowered her lashes. Rest can be fragile in large houses. So many doors, so many servants, so many little things wandering where they ought not. Rosamund poured tea. Her hand did not shake. That became its own victory. "Do you often find that your possessions wander, Lady Verity?" The widow's eyes lifted. They were dark, pretty, and pleased. "Only the sentimental ones. How troublesome." "Sometimes they return to familiar rooms." The silence that followed was small but exact. Rosamund set the teapot down. Beyond the connecting door, there was no sound from the library. Adrian was listening. She wondered whether he felt fury, shame, or the late education of hearing how women fought when men left enough silence between them. "A familiar room is a dangerous phrase," Rosamund said. It asks the listener to provide the impropriety. Verity gave a soft laugh. You are cleverer than people say. People rarely know what they have said until it is repeated by someone with a better memory. That landed. Not heavily, but enough. Verity touched the single pearl at her ear. I hope you do not think me impertinent. I came because I misplaced something last night. Your wrap, I believe. Among other things. Was the wrap recovered? Not yet. Curious. I saw it over your arm when you left. For the first time, Verity's expression paused half a second too long. Did you? I make a practice of observing what leaves my house. What a useful habit for a duchess. A necessary one. Rosamund lifted her cup. Especially when guests mislay belongings in unexpected places. Verity's gaze flickered. There it was. A small thing, almost nothing. But almost nothing could be enough, when placed in the proper light. Then perhaps I should ask whether anything was found, Verity said. That depends. On what? On whether it was lost. Verity leaned back, amused again, though the amusement was thinner now. You speak in riddles, Your Grace. No. I answer them. A carriage rolled past in the street outside, its wheels muffled by the damp morning. Rosamund placed her cup in its saucer and let the sound pass before she continued. Tell me, Lady Verity, do all your earrings fasten with the same clasp? Verity's hand stopped at her ear. The pause was brief. It was also the first honest thing Rosamund had seen from her. What an unusual question. It seemed a practical one. My jeweler concerns himself with such details. Then he is careless. Verity's smile sharpened. You have inspected my jewelry? I have inspected a broken clasp. The room went still. Verity looked at her with a softness that might have fooled a less tired woman. How unpleasant for you. Not as unpleasant as it must be for whoever broke it. Verity rose slowly, not in defeat but in retreat, disguised as offense. I can see I have called at an unfortunate moment. You called at the moment you intended. I won't pretend to understand your meaning. No. I do not imagine you will pretend less than necessary. The color in Verity's cheeks deepened by one careful shade. You should come to Lady Arundel's soirée tomorrow evening. A smaller company. Friends only. It would be a pity if anyone thought you unwilling to appear. How thoughtful. Bring His Grace if you wish. The words were mild. The challenge was not. Rosamund stood as well, because a duchess did not remain seated while Insult left the room wearing gloves. His Grace does not require my permission to enter a room, Lady Verity. But I am beginning to think some people require instruction before leaving one. Verity's eyes flashed. Then she curtsied with perfect grace. Until tomorrow, then. Perhaps. When Verity had gone, the silence held for 3 heartbeats before Adrian entered from the library. His face was cold, but his eyes were alive with an anger he had not permitted himself to spend. She knew, he said. Rosamund moved to the window and watched Lady Verity's carriage draw away from the curb. The widow did not look back. She knew there was something to know. The clasp disturbed her. Yes, and the wrap was false. Yes. Adrian came to stand several feet away, near enough that Rosamund felt his presence, and far enough that he did not claim the right to comfort her. Mrs. Bale found no record of Lady Verity's maid entering the house this morning before the card was delivered. The request for the wrap came by footman, not maid. Rosamund turned. So the wrap was an excuse to remind the household she had reason to ask about rooms, or to test who would repeat it. Millie was frightened when she told me. Millie is frightened of more than dismissal. Rosamund looked toward him sharply. What have you learned? Adrian unfolded the household list. During dinner, one upper corridor was unaccounted for during a quarter hour. The blue corridor. The name entered the room like a dropped glass. Rosamund felt the pearl in the locked drawer above them, absurdly present, though hidden. Who had the key? That is the next question. Then I will ask Mrs. Bale. I can ask. You can command. I can be answered. He stared at her, and for a moment his old habit rose between them, the habit of a duke who solved matters by removing them from others' hands. Then he folded the paper and placed it on the table between them. Very well. The concession was quiet, but it changed the air. Rosamund reached for the bell. Before her fingers touched the cord, the door opened a narrow inch, and Millie slipped in, as if fear had pushed her through. Her eyes darted to Adrian, then to Rosamund. In her hand was a folded scrap of paper. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she whispered. "I found this tucked behind the linen press. I don't know who put it there." Rosamund took it. The paper was cheap, torn from a servant's account book, and the handwriting hurried. "Ask Mrs. Bale about the blue corridor key." She read it once, then again. Adrian stepped closer, but he did not take it from her hand. His restraint was the only reason she showed it to him. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, Lady Verity's carriage had vanished into Mayfair traffic, leaving only the faint scent of orange blossom in the room. Rosamund folded the note along its old crease. "Now," she said, "we are no longer discussing jewellery, Mrs." Bale did not look surprised when Rosamund asked for the key ledger, and that, more than anything, told Rosamund that the housekeeper had been expecting the question. The three of them stood in the small morning room while the last trace of Lady Verity's perfume thinned in the air, and the folded scrap of paper lay on the table between the teacups, like something too humble to have entered a ducal household and too dangerous to ignore. Adrian had sent Millie downstairs with careful gentleness, not dismissal, and Rosamund had noticed the girl's shoulders loosen as she went. "Now, Mrs." Bale waited near the door, tall, narrow, and composed in her black gown, with the keys at her waist hanging still as judgment. She had served Caverleigh House since the last years of the Dowager Duchess, which meant she knew every room, every draught, every servant's weakness, and nearly every secret that rank pretended not to have. "The ledger, Mrs. Bale," Rosamund said. "The one for private corridor access." Mrs. Bale's eyes moved once to Adrian. It was not defiance, it was habit. In great houses, truth often looked first toward the man who could dismiss it. Rosamund felt the old humiliation rise, small but bitter. Before she could speak, Adrian did. "Her Grace asked you." Mrs. Bale bowed her head. "Yes, Your Grace." The housekeeper left and returned within minutes, carrying a narrow leather-bound book. It was worn at the corners, clean and plain, the kind of object that never appeared in drawing rooms, yet held the quiet machinery of aristocratic life. Rosamund took it before Adrian could. The action was slight, the meaning was not. She opened it on the table. The pages were ruled in careful columns: date, hour, corridor, key issued, purpose, authority returned. Most entries were dull enough to be safe. Linen inspected, chimney sweep admitted, curtain cords repaired, fire grate polished. Then, on the line for the previous evening, between a note about the yellow guest room and another about a loose hinge near the nursery wing, Rosamund saw it. Blue corridor, 9 o'clock, spare key. Curtains inspected, authority. F.A. Her fingers stopped on the page. F.A. Adrian came nearer. He did not lean over her shoulder. He stood beside her, allowing her the page first. That was new. "Felix Arundel," he said, and his voice lost all warmth. "Lady Arundel's brother, and Lady Verity's cousin by marriage," Rosamund said. Mrs. Bale's mouth tightened. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I questioned this entry when I saw it before dawn. The steward denies giving any order concerning curtains in the blue corridor." Rosamund looked up. "Who wrote the entry?" "Mr. Hobb, the under-butler. He received the request from a footman in Lord Felix Arundel's livery, or so he believed." "Believed?" Adrian asked Mrs. Bale's fingers closed over the ring of keys at her waist. The young man wore a dark coat and a badge. "He did not give his name, Mr. Hobb thought the matter came from his Grace, through a guest's servant. It was a confusion of rank, Your Grace, not malice." Adrian's face hardened. Confusion is often the door by which malice enters. Rosamund kept her eyes on the ledger. The entry was neat. Too neat. A false order written into a proper book did not look like a crime. It looked like housekeeping. "Was the key returned?" she asked. "Yes, Your Grace, at 9:20. "By whom?" Mrs. Bale hesitated. "It was left on the silver tray outside my room. No hand delivered it." The room became very quiet. Rosamund thought of Lady Verity's bare ear, her soft remark about familiar rooms, the missing wrap that had not been missing, the footman sent back in the morning. A design was forming. Not complete, but visible at the edges. Someone had used the habits of the house against the house itself. Someone had understood that servants obeyed rank, that ledgers could be made to look respectable, that a duchess would rather bleed in silence than let London smell scandal. "I would like to see the blue corridor," Rosamund said. Adrian turned toward her. "No." The word came too quickly. Mrs. Bale lowered her eyes. Rosamund closed the ledger with a soft thud. "I beg your pardon." Adrian's control returned, but not fast enough to hide the instinct beneath it. "Someone entered that passage with the purpose of injuring you. You will not walk into it, because a note from an unknown hand invites you. I am not walking into danger. I am walking into my own house, a house that was breached, and I am the one whose room was used." He stepped closer, and the force of him would have made another woman retreat. Rosamund did not. "Rosamund, I can have the passage examined. I can question every servant. I can bring Lord Felix here and make him explain himself before luncheon." "Yes," she said. "You can command. You can frighten. You can make men answer because they fear the Duke of Loxham. But I am the one they meant to shame, and I will not be kept ignorant of the manner in which I am being ruined." The last words struck the air between them. Adrian went still. His gaze searched her face, and whatever argument remained in him seemed to falter against what he found there. Not anger alone, not jealousy. A tired, sharpened dignity that had been denied too many explanations. "I did not mean to keep you ignorant," he said. "No, you only became accustomed to deciding what silence would spare me, Mrs." Bale looked down as if she had not heard. Adrian did not look away. That was arrogance. Rosamund had expected defense. The admission unsettled her. "Yes," she said, "because mercy built on dishonesty would help neither of them." It was. He drew a slow breath. "Then we go together." The blue corridor lay behind a baize-covered service door on the second floor. Not hidden, exactly, but discreet enough that guests would not notice it unless they had reason to know the house too well. Mrs. Bale led them with a shaded lamp, though daylight came pale through the high, narrow windows. The passage smelled faintly of beeswax, coal smoke, and old wood. On one side were private family rooms. On the other, a narrower servant access ran behind the walls. Rosamund had passed near this corridor countless times without considering how easily privacy depended upon obedience from people who could be tricked, pressured, or paid. Mrs. Bale stopped outside the door to Rosamund's bedchamber. "The spare key opens the service entrance there, Your Grace." Rosamund looked at the lock. It was polished, ordinary, and suddenly obscene. Adrian stood half a step behind her, close enough to intervene, not close enough to crowd. She appreciated that, against her will. "Open it," she said. Mrs. Bale did. The service door gave onto the small dressing passage beside Rosamund's room. A servant entering that way could have reached the bed, placed the earring, and gone without touching the main corridor at all. Rosamund stepped inside. The air felt colder, though perhaps that was memory. "Millie came in by the main door?" she asked. "Yes, Your Grace," Mrs. Bale said. She would not have used this entrance unless ordered. Adrian examined the lock plate. "There are scratches." Mrs. Bale lifted the lamp. 3 fine marks shone near the brass, no longer than a quarter-inch. "Fresh," Adrian said. Rosamund looked at the floor. Near the baseboard, half hidden by the shadow of the dressing table, something pale clung to a splinter in the wood. She crouched before either of them could stop her and drew it free with the edge of her handkerchief, a thread. Grey silk, fine and smooth, not from Millie's plain gown, not from Mrs. Bale's black wool. "Lady Verity wore rose yesterday," Rosamund said. Adrian's gaze fixed on the thread, but she left in a grey cloak. Mrs. Bale's expression changed for the first time. "She did, Your Grace." Fur-lined, pearl clasp at the throat. The 3 details aligned with a quietness that made Rosamund's skin tighten. Not proof enough for London. Enough for the room. Enough for the next step. Adrian turned to Mrs. Bale. "The locks on the blue corridor are to be changed today. The locksmith is to enter by the mews, not the front door. No explanation is to be given beyond maintenance." "Yes, Your Grace. Mr. Hobb is not to be dismissed." Rosamund spoke before Adrian could continue. Both he and Mrs. Bale looked at her. If he was deceived through obedience, we do not punish him to make ourselves feel safer. We question him. We protect Millie as well. Mrs. Bale's eyes softened by the smallest degree. Very good, Your Grace. Adrian studied Rosamund in silence. You thought I would sacrifice them. I thought this house has been trained, as all great houses are trained, to offer up the easiest person first. The words were not accusation alone. They were knowledge. Adrian accepted them as such. Then it will be retrained. For one moment in the narrow service passage, with dust in the corners, and a grey thread folded in Rosamund's handkerchief, he looked less like the remote husband of her wedding breakfast, and more like a man standing at the edge of a room he should have entered long ago. I am sorry, he said quietly. For the locks, for the house not feeling safe before the locks failed, Rosamund could not answer at once. There were apologies that begged to be admired, and there were apologies that laid themselves down without asking to be lifted. This one was the second kind. She folded the handkerchief over the thread. Then, help me make it safe, without making it blind. Mrs. Bale returned the spare key to her ring, but Rosamund held out her hand. The housekeeper paused, then looked to Adrian. He did not speak. Mrs. Bale placed the key in Rosamund's palm. It was heavier than she expected. Heavy enough to feel like a duty, not a trinket. No servant is to be blamed for this without my knowledge, Rosamund said. No story leaves this floor. And if Lord Felix Arundel's name appears in my household ledger, I intend to know whether his hand placed it there, or merely profited from its presence. Adrian's mouth tightened, almost with approval. You shall. They had barely returned to the morning room when a footman knocked and entered, with a folded paper on a salver. His face was blank in the trained way that meant he had already read enough of the outside to know the inside was dangerous. Delivered from the street, Your Grace. Adrian took it, unfolded it, and his eyes went cold. He handed it to Rosamund without a word. It was a cheap scandal sheet, damp at the edges from the morning air. No names appeared. No names were needed. In sharp black print, one line seemed to leap from the page. A pearl found where no pearl ought to be. Rosamund felt the blue corridor key press into her palm. Somewhere in London, the private wound had already been dressed for public amusement. By 10 o'clock, the sentence had crossed more rooms in Mayfair than any respectable calling card. It moved by folded paper, by footman's whisper, by ladies bending over breakfast trays, by gentlemen pretending not to read scandal sheets while reading every line twice. No names had been printed. That was the cruelty of it. Names would have allowed denial, outrage, even legal action with a clean target. Suggestion gave London the pleasure of certainty without the burden of proof. Rosamund stood in Adrian's library with the cheap paper spread across his desk and the blue corridor key closed in her hand. The words were vulgar in their restraint. A noble house. A misplaced pearl. A duchess too dignified to ask where it had been before it was found. Adrian read the paragraph once, then again, and the controlled line of his mouth became almost colourless. His solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, stood near the bookshelves with a leather case under one arm and the pained expression of a man summoned to deal with society's favourite form of poison. If your grace proceeds against the publisher, he said carefully, the matter will become fixed to your name by the very effort to deny it. Adrian looked up. You advise inaction, I advise patience. For the moment, that is what cowards call surrender. Mr. Pemberton did not flinch. He had served dukes long enough to understand that anger from a great man was often only fear in formal dress. A direct suit would require naming the injury. To name the injury is to repeat it. To repeat it is to make the Duchess the centre of the very speculation we are trying to contain. Rosamund heard her title like a veil being placed over her face. The Duchess, not Rosamund. Not the woman whose private room had been entered, whose household had been used, whose bed had become entertainment for strangers. And if we do nothing, she said, they will assume silence is confession. Mr. Pemberton bowed his head. They may assume it, they cannot yet prove it. London rarely waits for proof when amusement is available. Adrian's gaze moved to her, and for the first time that morning the heat in his expression softened into something more dangerous than rage. Attention. Full attention. What do you wish to do? The question stilled her more than an order would have done. In 18 months, Adrian had asked her opinions on seating arrangements, charities, tenants' petitions, and whether the south drawing-room curtains needed replacement. He had not often asked what she wished when the answer might cost him comfort. Rosamund looked down at the scandal sheet. I will not hide. Mr. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. Adrian did not move. Where? He asked. Bond Street. Madame Cerise expects me for a fitting. That appointment can be postponed. Of course it can. That is why it must not be. The room fell quiet. Outside the tall windows, the morning was bright enough to be merciless. Carriage wheels passed over the street, and somewhere in the house, a footman opened the front door to another delivery of civilized intrusion. Rosamund placed the blue corridor key on Adrian's desk beside the scandal sheet. If I remain indoors, they will say I am ashamed. If I go out disordered, they will say I am broken. I shall go out exactly as I intended, before they thought to amuse themselves with me. Adrian's eyes held hers. Then I will accompany you. You have business, none more urgent. If you come, they will stare. They are already staring. They will stare harder. His voice lowered. Then let them learn I can stare back. There was no tenderness in the words. That was perhaps why they reached her. Tenderness would have been easy to distrust. This sounded like a promise hammered into steel. Rosamund turned toward Mr. Pemberton. You will continue tracing the sheet? Yes, Your Grace. Quietly. Begin with the phrasing. Certain expressions have a scent. Mr. Pemberton looked faintly surprised, then impressed. As Your Grace says. Adrian glanced at the printed paragraph again. A misplaced pearl, he said. That phrase is not from a servant. No, Rosamund replied. Servants know better than to make malice sound poetic. 2 hours later, Rosamund stepped from the carriage on Bond Street with Adrian. Her side and her spine held so straight that the effort felt physical. She wore a deep green walking dress trimmed in black braid, a velvet bonnet tied beneath her chin, and gloves buttoned at the wrist. Nothing about her invited pity. Nothing about her confessed hurt. The street glittered with respectable business. Milliners, jewelers, booksellers, modesties, and carriage traffic filled the air with the polished noise of a London morning. Yet conversation shifted as soon as she appeared. Not stopped. That would have been kinder. It bent, it thinned, it rearranged itself around her. A lady in a lavender pelisse looked at Rosamund's ears, then whispered behind her glove. 2 gentlemen outside a print shop lowered their newspapers too late. An older countess gave an exaggerated bow that was almost respect and almost mockery. Rosamund felt every glance land. One near her shoulder, one at her wedding ring. One at Adrian's face, searching for guilt, boredom, irritation, any crumb society could feed upon. Adrian offered none. He stood beside her, as though the pavement itself had become a receiving line, and every passerby owed his wife the honor due her rank. He did not touch her at first. That restraint mattered. Had he taken her arm too quickly, London would have read rescue. Had he walked ahead, London would have read distance. Instead, he waited until she turned toward Madame Cerise's door, then offered his arm with the exact courtesy he would have given her before a royal hostess. Your Grace, he said. The title was simple, public, unmistakable. Rosamund placed her gloved hand on his sleeve. His arm was steady beneath her fingers. Across the street, the 2 gentlemen suddenly found reason to look at a bootmaker's sign. Inside the modiste's salon, warmth and silk closed around them. Madame Cerise, who was French by birth and English by calculation, swept forward with a curtsy deep enough to satisfy rank, and quick enough to avoid drama. Your Grace. Your fitting room is prepared. Her eyes darted once to Adrian, then back to Rosamund. And His Grace honors my poor establishment. His Grace waits only a moment, Rosamund said. Adrian's gaze moved across the room. 3 ladies sat near a display of ribbons. One was Lady Pennard, whose deafness had never prevented her from hearing scandal. Another was Mrs. Vale, a banker's widow who purchased entry into society by carrying gossip from door to door like a basket of fresh fruit. The third, Lady Bexham, looked directly at Rosamund's ears and smiled. "How brave of you to come out today, Duchess," Lady Bexham said. "Some women would have kept to their rooms after such a curious little publication." The room sharpened. Madame Cerise froze with a length of satin in her hands. Rosamund felt Adrian move beside her, not forward, not yet, but ready. She kept her voice light. "Curious publications are like damp weather, Lady Bexham. They inconvenience everyone, but they reveal most about the houses with poor foundations." Lady Pennard blinked. Mrs. Vale coughed into her handkerchief. Lady Bexham's smile cooled. "How philosophical! How necessary!" Adrian spoke then, his tone quiet enough that the room had to lean inward to hear it. "My wife has always understood the difference between noise and consequence." Lady Bexham turned pale at the word wife. Not Duchess. Wife. It was the first time Adrian had called Rosamund that in public with anything like possession, and the force of it entered the room with more authority than a shout. He did not look at Lady Bexham again. That made the dismissal complete. He turned to Rosamund. "I shall return in half an hour. You need not inconvenience yourself." "It is no inconvenience." His gaze held hers, and for one breath Bond Street, scandal, verity, and every watching woman seemed to fall away. "I will be outside when you are ready." The fitting itself passed in fragments, pins, silk. Madame Cerise murmuring about waistlines and sleeve length. Lady Pennard pretending not to observe from the outer room. Rosamund answered when necessary, and used silence when words would have cost too much. Through the front window she could see Adrian on the pavement below, speaking with no one, reading nothing, simply waiting. Men approached him and retreated with bows. Ladies slowed and moved on. He did not leave. The sight should not have mattered. It did. When Rosamund emerged, Madame Cerise handed her a small wrapped packet of ribbon samples. "For Loxham Park, perhaps," she said, soft enough that the others could not hear. "Something green. It suits your grace." There was kindness in it, and Rosamund nearly faltered. Kindness was more dangerous than cruelty, because it found the places one had not guarded. "Thank you," she said. Outside, Adrian helped her into the carriage. His hand closed over hers for the briefest possible moment, no longer than propriety allowed, and long enough to be felt. "You bore that well," he said once they were inside. "I dislike being praised for endurance. Then I will not praise it." He looked out the window as Bond Street slid past. "I will say instead that Lady Bexham will regret repeating what she does not understand." "Will she?" Yes, there was no drama in his voice, only certainty. Rosamund looked at the passing shops, the ladies, the men with newspapers folded beneath their arms. The sheet knew too much and not enough. Whoever fed it wanted the world to know a pearl existed, but not how it came there. "Verity's words," Adrian said, "from the morning call and from dinner." She likes phrases that sound delicate until they cut. Mr. Pemberton will follow the printer. Printers can be paid not to remember. So can footmen. So can cousins with debt. Rosamund turned to him. "Lord Felix, he has been borrowing heavily, quietly, badly, and you knew, I suspected." I did not connect him to this. "Because you were looking elsewhere." He accepted the blow without flinching. "Yes." The carriage slowed before Caverleigh House. Before the footman opened the door, Adrian spoke again. "I will not look elsewhere now." Rosamund did not answer. She could not afford to give belief merely because it had finally been requested. As she stepped down, Mrs. Bale appeared at the top of the front steps holding a salver. On it lay a cream envelope sealed with dark red wax. Rosamund knew the hand before she touched it. Lady Arundel's invitation had returned, this time with a line written below the formal card. "Bring the Duke, if you still can." Rosamund felt the eyes of the street behind her and Adrian's presence at her side. She closed the envelope carefully. "It seems we are expected tomorrow evening," she said. Adrian's expression became very calm. "Then tomorrow evening," he replied, "we shall disappoint them by arriving together." Lady Arundel's townhouse glowed as if nothing cruel had ever been spoken beneath a chandelier. The windows shone over the wet Mayfair pavement. The steps were lined with footmen in livery, and every carriage that stopped before the door seemed to deliver not guests but witnesses. Rosamund sat inside the Caverleigh carriage, with her gloved hands folded over her fan, aware of Adrian beside her in the dimness. He had said little during the drive from Caverleigh House. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the quality of the silence. It no longer felt empty, it felt armed. "We can still leave," he said as the footman approached the carriage door. Rosamund looked toward the lit entrance where Lady Arundel's guests were already disappearing into warmth, music, and judgment. "No. That is what they expect me to want. It may be what you deserve. I deserve the choice." He turned toward her. In the carriage shadow, his face was all restraint and anger held behind manners. "Then choose with the knowledge that I will stand where you place me." The words found a place in her chest that she had not given him permission to touch. She opened her fan, closed it again, and allowed the footman to help her down. The air smelled of rain, horse leather, and coal smoke. Adrian stepped after her and offered his arm. This time she accepted before the watching footman could wonder whether she would. Inside, the hall was crowded with silk, black coats, diamonds, white gloves, and voices pitched to that bright, controlled level used by people who wished to hear everything while appearing to listen to nothing. Lady Arundel came forward in plum satin, her smile wide enough to show hospitality and narrow enough to show malice. "Your Grace, Duchess. How very good of you to come. How very determined of you to ask," Rosamund replied. Lady Arundel's eyes flickered. Adrian's hand rested lightly over Rosamund's where it lay on his sleeve. "We do not disappoint invitations sent twice," he said. The words were courteous. The warning was not. Lady Arundel dipped her head and guided them toward the main drawing room, where conversation thinned upon their arrival. It did not stop. Society was too practiced for that. It merely curved around Rosamund like water around a stone, touching and withdrawing. She felt women glance at her ears, her throat, her hands, then at Adrian. She felt men deciding whether to pity him, envy him, or wait until someone safer spoke first. At the far end of the room, near the pianoforte, Lady Verity Mordaunt stood beneath a branch of candles in silver muslin. Her dark hair swept high, one side pinned away to reveal a bare right ear. The left ear bore a single pearl. The absence on the other side was so deliberate, it might as well have been announced by a servant. Rosamund's stomach tightened. Adrian's arm hardened beneath her hand. "Do not," she murmured. His eyes remained on Verity. "She is displaying it. Yes, she means to make you look at it. Then I shall look at something else." Rosamund turned to greet Lady Pennard, who had no business being at such a gathering, except that she was old enough to attend almost anything, and deaf enough to deny hearing everything. Within minutes, Rosamund found herself at the center of a small ring of women, each armed with a smile. Lady Bexham was there, newly cautious after Bond Street but not yet wise. Mrs. Vale hovered beside a marble-topped table, eager as a sparrow near crumbs. Lady Arundel returned with Verity at her side. "We were just speaking of sentimental jewels," Lady Arundel said. "How certain pieces seem to travel through families, houses, memories, and sometimes bedrooms," Mrs. Vale said, then laughed too quickly, as if her own courage had startled her. The ring tightened. Rosamund felt the heat of Adrian's presence several feet away, where Lord Pennard had detained him with some remark about railway shares. He could hear. Everyone could hear. That was the point. Verity touched the pearl at her ear. "I always think jewels have loyalty. They return to the place where they were most admired." "How unfortunate for jewelers," Rosamund said. "They must spend half their lives recovering disappointed merchandise." Lady Pennard barked a laugh, though she had likely heard only the word jewelers. Lady Arundel's smile stiffened. Verity's did not. "You have such composure, Duchess, I admire it." "Do you?" "Oh, very much." Some women would be unsettled by sudden discoveries. Only if they mistake discovery for understanding. Verity tilted her head, letting the single pearl catch the light. "And do you understand everything you have discovered?" Rosamund looked at the pearl, then at Verity's bare ear, then at the room behind her, where every gaze pretended to belong elsewhere. Not everything, but enough to know that losing one earring is carelessness, losing two is performance, and speaking of either in company is poor breeding. A hush fell. Small, exquisite. Verity's eyes cooled. Lady Arundel lifted her fan. Mrs. Vale looked as if she had swallowed a pin. Rosamund did not smile. She would not give them the relief of thinking she was pleased with herself. Verity recovered first, because cruelty had made her quick. "You mistake concern for impertinence?" "No," Rosamund said. "I mistake nothing tonight." Adrian appeared beside her then, not rushing, not rescuing, but arriving with the weight of rank made visible. "Lady Verity," he said. "Your Grace," Verity curtsied, softer than necessary. "We were discussing pearls, so I gathered." His gaze moved once to her bare ear, and his contempt was more devastating for being quiet. A limited subject when overhandled. Lady Arundel's fan froze halfway open. Verity's mouth parted slightly. Adrian turned not to her, but to Rosamund. "There is air in the conservatory if you wish it." A lesser offer would have sounded like retreat. This sounded like acknowledgement. Rosamund understood the difference. In a moment, she faced the women again. "I promised Lady Pennard I would ask about her grandson's appointment." Lady Pennard, who had promised nothing and heard less, looked delighted to be made important. The conversation had no choice but to shift. Rosamund let it. She had not won the room, not yet, but she had refused to break inside it. Later, while the guests moved toward music, Adrian stood near a column half hidden by palms, and watched Lord Felix Arundel bend close to Verity beside the curtain. Rosamund saw Adrian's attention sharpen, followed his gaze, and stepped nearer without appearing to. Felix was handsome in the polished, careless way of men who owed money, but not apologies. His smile had a nervous edge. "The Duchess has not broken yet," he murmured. Verity's answer was too low for Rosamund to hear, but the look she gave Felix was not the look of a woman innocently embarrassed by gossip. It was command. Adrian's fingers closed around his gloves. Rosamund touched his sleeve once, a warning, a request, or perhaps both. "Not here," she said. "He spoke your name without using it. Then he is a coward as well as a fool." Rosamund. The way he said her name made her look at him. "Not Duchess, not your Grace, Rosamund." The anger in him was not cold now, it was alive, and carefully leashed because she had asked him to leash it. "I heard him," she said. "I know. Do you?" His voice was low. "Do you know what it costs me not to cross this room and make him understand what he has dared?" "Yes," she said, though perhaps she did not. "But if you do, the story becomes your temper instead of their lie." That struck him. He looked toward Felix once more, then back at her. "You should not have to be the steadier one. I have had practice." The words were not meant to wound. They did anyway. She saw it in his face. Before either could speak again, Verity approached with Lady Arundel beside her. "Duchess," Verity said lightly, "we hope to see you at the charity concert next week, unless you mean to withdraw from society for a little peace. Peace obtained by retreat is often rented at too high a price." "How brave, how repetitive of you to say so." Lady Arundel's nostrils flared. Adrian's voice entered before the insult could grow. "My wife's attendance does not require your permission, Lady Verity, nor your encouragement." Verity looked at him through her lashes. "No one doubts the Duchess has your protection. Then let no one test whether they are mistaken." The room around them did not fall silent, but enough people stopped breathing to make the music sound. Exposed, Verity curtsied. This time there was nothing soft in it. "Of course, Your Grace." They left shortly afterward, not in haste, not in defeat, but precisely when departure could not be mistaken for flight. In the carriage, the night closed around them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Rosamund watched the blurred lamps pass the window and felt the strain of the evening drain from her bones, leaving behind an exhaustion so complete it felt like calm. "You were magnificent," Adrian said at last. She did not look at him. "I was tired." The answer silenced him. Then softly, he said, That is the first honest thing anyone said in that room. She turned then. No. Lord Felix was honest when he said I had not broken. Adrian's face darkened. He will regret it, perhaps. But regret is rarely useful after the damage is done. He leaned back, gaze fixed on the opposite seat, as if the carriage wall contained an old verdict. There is something I should have told you before tonight. Rosamund felt the air change. About Verity. Yes, the wheels rolled over a patch of uneven stone, and the small jolt gave him a moment he did not deserve but clearly needed. Before our marriage, my mother considered her. Not formally, not to the point of an offer, but enough that London noticed. Rosamund's hands folded tightly in her lap. London has been noticing ever since. I know. No, she said. You knew there had been talk. You did not know what it was like to stand beside you, while people treated me as the correction to a more interesting mistake. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the cold Duke was gone. In his place sat a man who had been handed a truth and found no honorable way to refuse it. You are right. The carriage turned toward Caverleigh House. Why did you not marry her? Rosamund asked. Adrian looked toward the window, then back to her. Because she wanted the house before she wanted me. The answer was quiet, and it opened a door neither of them had meant to reach so soon. And because my mother learned something about the Mordaunts that made her forbid the match entirely. What did she learn? Adrian's jaw tightened. Debt manipulation. A hunger for keys that did not belong to them. Rosamund felt the blue corridor rise between them like a shadow. Then she had been promised a door, perhaps, and when I became Duchess, I closed it. His gaze met hers. No. I closed it badly, then left you standing in front of it, without telling you why someone might try to force it open. For once, Rosamund had no ready answer. The carriage stopped before Caverleigh House. Beyond the door waited the same rooms, the same servants, the same locked rosewood box with its single pearl inside. But something had shifted. Not enough to save them. Enough to make the next truth unavoidable. The door of Adrian's study closed behind them, with a sound softer than accusation and heavier than courtesy. Caverleigh House had gone quiet after the soiree, but it was not the calm of sleep. It was the hush of servants waiting behind doors, of candles burning low, of a great house pretending nothing had followed its master and mistress home. Rosamund stood just inside the study, while Adrian crossed to the desk and unlocked the lower drawer with a key from his watch chain. He did not ask her to sit. He seemed to understand that sitting would make this a conversation, and what lay between them was not yet civilized enough for chairs. The room smelled of leather, ash, and old paper. It was a masculine room, ordered and polished, lined with ledgers and estate maps, with the Caverleigh arms stamped in gold above the mantel. Rosamund had entered it many times as Duchess, usually to sign letters, approve accounts, or discuss charitable subscriptions. Tonight it felt like entering the machinery of a life from which she had been excluded while being asked to represent it flawlessly. Adrian placed a bundle of letters on the desk. The ribbon around them had faded from blue to grey. My mother kept correspondence concerning marriage alliances, he said. She kept everything. Rosamund looked at the letters, then at him. Including the reasons she rejected Lady Verity. Yes, and you did not think your wife should know why society treated another woman as if she had misplaced a crown I was wearing. He flinched. It was slight, it was enough. I thought silence would bury it. Silence does not bury what other people enjoy digging up. He drew one letter from the bundle and unfolded it with care. My mother first considered Verity because the Mordaunts had old connections in Kent, and because Verity was admired. She was clever, socially fluent, and unafraid of difficult rooms. Useful qualities in a duchess, yes. Rosamund accepted the clean wound of that word. Then why not her? Adrian's gaze remained on the letter, though she suspected he no longer saw the ink. Because she began asking questions before any offer existed. Which rooms at Loxham Park were private? Which jewels were heirlooms rather than personal gifts? Which servants had been with the family longest? Whether my mother kept separate household keys in London and Hampshire. Rosamund felt the blue corridor key in memory, cold and heavy in her palm. Those are not the questions of a woman in love. No. Were you in love with her? The question came out more quietly than Rosamund had intended. That made it worse. Adrian looked up then. No. She studied his face. For any hesitation, any gallant lie offered too late to heal anything, she found none. Did she know that? I believe she knew I was not easily moved. She may have mistaken that for a challenge. And the word escaped before she had fully measured it. Adrian's expression altered. You? Was I a challenge, a convenience, or merely less dangerous? The study went still. Even the fire seemed to lower itself. Adrian set the letter down. Rosamund. No, answer me. Was I chosen, Adrian, or merely less dangerous? The use of his name struck both of them. She had used it so rarely in private that it seemed to enter the room like a forbidden guest. He took one step toward her, then stopped, as though distance had become the only respect he still knew how to give. You were chosen, she almost laughed, but the sound would have broken something she still needed intact. By whom? Your mother. My father, the solicitor who found our settlements compatible. By me. After which recommendation? After watching you refuse to flatter Lady Ashcombe at the Chesterfield dinner when everyone else did. That startled her. She remembered the dinner only vaguely. A long table, bad soup, Lady Ashcombe laughing at a companion's worn gloves. Rosamund had changed the subject with such careful firmness that no one could accuse her of rebuke, yet the companion had been spared. She had not known Adrian noticed. He continued, his voice lower. After hearing you correct Lord Vane on a tenant matter, without making him feel foolish enough to become cruel. After seeing you give your shawl to a shivering maid at my mother's musicale, and then pretend you had left it in the retiring room. My mother approved the match because you were suitable. I agreed because you were decent in rooms where no one rewarded decency. Rosamund's throat tightened, and she hated herself for it. That is a noble reason to choose a parish committee member. It was a cowardly way to choose a wife. The honesty landed between them. Adrian looked at his own hand resting on the desk, as if judging what it had failed to hold. I admired you before I knew how to want anything that might make me vulnerable. So I called it respect. I told myself respect was safer for you, safer for me, safer for the house. And while you were being safe, I was being compared to a woman you had already refused but never explained. Yes, do. You know what that made me feel, he answered without defense. Invisible. The word should have relieved her. Instead, it pressed tears behind her eyes, and she turned away before they could become visible. She would not cry in his study, not among his maps and keys and inherited certainty. Invisible women still hear things, she said. They hear when people pause before saying their names. They hear when a widow is welcomed like memory, and a wife is treated like furniture polished for the occasion. They hear when their husbands do nothing, because no one has technically insulted them. Adrian's silence changed. It became grief held very carefully. I did not know how much harm could be done by what was not technically an insult. Women know. We are raised inside the space between insult and deniability. He crossed to a cabinet and removed another ledger, this one narrower than the household key book. Then I will give you what I should have given you at the beginning. He set it before her. Access records from my mother's final season in London. Guest entries, private room restrictions, correspondence notes. Verity's name appears more often than it should. Rosamund looked at him. You kept these from me, yes, because I thought the matter dead. No, she opened the ledger. Because you thought it belonged to your past, and I was only required to manage your present. He took that too. Yes. She turned several pages. The entries were dry, brief, and devastating in their plainness. Miss Mordaunt asked after the West Cabinet. Miss Mordaunt found near the old music room without escort. Miss Mordaunt's maid questioned regarding missing duplicate ring. No accusation, no scandal. Only patterns kept by a dowager duchess who had understood danger in the form of curiosity. Rosamund stopped at an entry dated 4 years earlier. Miss Mordaunt not to be admitted to private corridor without my express order. She touched the line with one finger. Your mother knew, she did, and when she died, the warning died with her. Not entirely. I remembered enough to keep Verity at a distance. Rosamund lifted her eyes. Not enough to keep her from standing beside me with one pearl in her ear, while half of London watched. Pain crossed his face. No. It was the absence of argument that undid her composure more than any apology could have done. She closed the ledger, then opened it again because closing it felt like letting him protect her from facts. I want copies of every relevant page. You shall have them. I want Mrs. Bale told that. I am to be answered directly about household access. She will be told. And I want no servant dismissed to make this simpler. No servant will be dismissed without your knowledge, Rosamund. Nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was procedure, yet procedure steadied her. She could stand inside a list of actions more safely than inside the ache he had created with those unexpected memories of her kindness. Adrian moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. I would like to take your hand. The request was so careful that it wounded her. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. Why? Because I want to. Because I will not presume I may. There it was again. The man she had married and the man he might have been, separated by a narrow bridge of restraint. Rosamund placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers gently, almost reverently, as if he had discovered too late that something in his keeping could be bruised without ever breaking aloud. I don't forgive you tonight, she said, his thumb stilled over her glove. I don't ask you to. I don't know whether I believe all of this yet. Then I will make the truth patient. She closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second only. Then a hurried knock sounded at the study door, and Adrian released her before anyone entered, not in shame, but in respect. Come, he said. Millie stood in the doorway, cheeks pale, cap slightly crooked from haste. Mrs. Bale hovered behind her, with an expression that said the girl had insisted. Forgive me, Your Grace, Millie said, looking first at Rosamund. I shouldn't come so late, but I remembered something from the night of the dinner. Rosamund stepped away from the desk. Tell me. Millie twisted her hands, then forced them still. When I went to fetch fresh towels, I saw a lady near the blue corridor door. I thought she was lost. She had a grey cloak, fur at the edge, and a pearl clasp at the throat. I didn't see her face, not clear, but she smelled of orange blossom. Rosamund did not move. Adrian's face went cold in the old ducal way, but his eyes went first to her, not to the door, not to the imagined culprit, not to revenge, to her. Millie swallowed. I was afraid to say before. I thought if I named a lady and I was wrong, I'd be turned off without a character. Rosamund crossed the room and took the girl's trembling hands between her own. You are not wrong to tell the truth late. You are brave to tell it at all. Millie's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Rosamund released her gently and turned back to Adrian. The study, the letters, the ledger, the old warnings, the grey cloak, the orange blossom, all of it gathered into one clear and merciless line. Adrian spoke very softly. Verity was at the door. Rosamund looked at the faded ledger on the desk. No, she said. Verity has been at the door for years. The charity concert at Lady Bexham's assembly rooms was meant to benefit widows of naval officers, which gave London the pleasure of appearing compassionate while arranging itself according to rank, rivalry, and appetite. By 8 o'clock, the long room glittered with candles, gilt chairs, polished instruments, and the quiet cruelty of people who had come as much to watch the Duchess of Loxham as to hear the soprano. Rosamund felt it as soon as she entered on Adrian's arm. Every conversation dipped, recovered, and sharpened. Fans lifted. Gloved fingers touched earrings. Men, who had ignored charitable appeals for years, suddenly studied the program, as if salvation were printed between the songs. She wore dark blue silk with no pearls at all, only small sapphires at her ears and her wedding ring beneath her glove. Adrian had noticed the absence of pearls when she came down the staircase at Caverleigh House, but he had not remarked upon it. He had merely looked at her for one breath longer than usual and said, You look like a woman no room can diminish. She had answered, "Don't make promises on behalf of rooms." He had bowed his head, accepting the correction, and offered his arm. Now that arm was steady beneath her fingers as Lady Bexham approached, with the bright haste of a hostess who smelled scandal and hoped to call it concern. "Your Grace, Duchess. How kind of you to attend." "Charity should not suffer because society is easily distracted," Rosamund said. Lady Bexham's smile trembled at the edges. "Indeed. We are all so grateful for calm examples." Adrian's voice was smooth. "Calm is often mistaken for permission, Lady Bexham. It is not always so." The hostess coloured and retreated. Rosamund did not look at him. "You need not frighten every woman with a fan. I was not aware I had begun. You have. Then I shall be selective." Against her will, the corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. They took their places near the second row, visible enough to deny retreat, not so central as to seem theatrical. Mr. Pemberton had advised caution that afternoon. Millie's statement, the grey thread, the ledger entry, and the Dowager Duchess's old notes formed a pattern, but not yet a weapon. Rosamund understood. A pattern could convince the injured. A weapon had to survive the indifferent. Verity and Felix arrived moments before the first song, late enough that heads turned. Verity wore pale silver, with her dark hair pinned away from both ears. On one side hung the remaining pearl drop earring. On the other side, nothing. No curl hid the absence now. It was naked, deliberate, and intimate. Felix walked beside her with the nervous brightness of a man who had mistaken audacity for safety. Rosamund felt Adrian's arm tense. "No," she whispered without moving her lips. "Not yet," he looked down at her. "She is parading the lie. Then let her walk farther with it." The soprano began. Her voice rose pure and controlled above the strings, but few people listened with whole attention. During the second piece, Verity turned her head slightly, whenever candlelight could catch the single pearl. During the third, Felix leaned toward a matron behind him and murmured something that caused the Rosamund's eyes to fly toward Rosamund's hands. Rosamund sat still. She had learned stillness as a girl, perfected it as a duchess, and now used it as a shield. But shields grew heavy. By the interval, the room had warmed with candles and whispers. Guests drifted toward lemonade, wine, and little plates of sugared biscuits. Rosamund stood with Adrian near a column wreathed in greenery, while Lady Pennard asked loudly whether the widows being assisted were poor widows or merely inconvenient ones. Rosamund answered with enough composure to earn a nod from the old lady. Then Verity approached. Felix hovered a few feet behind her, a glass in hand, his smile thin. "Duchess," Verity said. "Your Grace, what a moving evening. One is reminded how precarious a woman's security can be when a man's protection fails." The sentence landed softly and spread poison. Adrian's gaze became lethal. Rosamund touched his sleeve once. "A woman's security should not depend entirely on a man's protection," she said. "How modern of you. How old-fashioned of you to confuse dependence with virtue." Lady Pennard gave another delighted laugh, though the meaning may have reached her only in pieces. Verity's eyes cooled. "Still, there are losses one cannot prevent." She raised her hand toward her remaining earring. "Jewels, reputations, illusions." Before Rosamund could answer, Verity's fingers slipped. The pearl dropped. It struck the polished floor with a tiny sound, then rolled into the open space between them. Every head within 20 feet turned. The room breathed in. No one bent to pick it up. The pearl lay there, round and white and obscene in its innocence. Felix stepped forward, his voice pitched just loudly enough to travel. "Careful, cousin. Some jewels travel more intimately than others." The silence was immediate. It did not fall. It clenched. Lady Bexham went pale. Mrs. Vale lifted her fan and failed to hide her stare. A young woman near the pianoforte whispered, "Oh," and was hushed by her mother. Rosamund felt the room look not at the fallen pearl, but at her ears, at her hand on Adrian's sleeve, at the place where humiliation was expected to bloom. For one strange moment, everything became very clear. The candles, the polish on the floor. Verity's parted lips arranged as surprise. Felix's bright, foolish eyes, Adrian's breath changing beside her. Rosamund bent. Not quickly, not with panic. She bent as a duchess might bend to retrieve a dropped glove from a church pew, measured and unashamed. She picked up the pearl with her gloved fingers and looked at the clasp. Whole, not bent. Not broken. Not the same earring. The discovery flashed through her like cold water. Verity had brought the twin into public play because she did not know Rosamund still held the damaged one. "You have recovered it," Verity said, her voice soft. "How fortunate." Rosamund straightened and held the earring out. Fortunate things rarely arrive so well rehearsed. A murmur stirred. Verity's expression flickered, then Felix laughed. "Come, Duchess, we are among friends. A misplaced jewel need not become an indictment." Adrian moved. It was only half a step, but the room felt it. "You will address my wife with care," Felix's smile thinned. "I meant no offense, Your Grace. That is usually said by men who have spent great effort arranging one." The room chilled. Rosamund could feel the scandal tipping. One more word from Adrian in the evening would become a ducal confrontation. One more word from Felix and she would be forced to stand inside an insult no phrase could politely disguise. Adrian understood that too well. His hand closed over hers, not roughly, but with decision. "We are leaving," he said. Rosamund looked at him. No. The word was quiet. He heard it. He also heard the room. He heard the ladies pretending not to listen, the gentleman waiting for bloodless violence, the hostess calculating damage. The political duke overcame the husband. "Now," he said under his breath. He took the pearl from her hand, placed it on the nearest table, and led her from the assembly room, before anyone could claim he had dragged her. But not before everyone understood he had removed her. That was the wound. Not his grip, which was careful. Not his pace, which was controlled. The wound was that he had chosen containment while she was still standing. In the entrance hall, footmen scrambled for their wraps. Behind them, the concert resumed with a trembling chord, absurd and thin. Rosamund let Adrian place her cloak over her shoulders. She let him hand her into the carriage. She let the door close. Only when the carriage pulled away from Lady Bexham's steps did she remove her glove. Adrian sat opposite her, his face harsh with anger. He will answer for that. Rosamund looked down at her left hand. The wedding ring shone in the dim carriage light, a small circle of gold that had once meant duty, then endurance, then perhaps the beginning of something more dangerous. She slid it from her finger. Adrian went still. "Rosamund." She placed the ring in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Do not." His voice dropped. "I was trying to spare you." She looked at him then. "No. You were trying to spare the room." The accusation struck harder than any shout. His face lost its anger and something worse moved beneath it. Understanding. Too late. If I had allowed that scene to continue, they would have fed on it for weeks. They already will. Only now they will say I was taken away because I could not bear it. That is not why I took you away. Intentions are private things, Adrian. Humiliation is not. He had no answer. The carriage wheels rolled over wet stone. Outside, London passed in dark windows and yellow lamps, indifferent to the breaking of whatever fragile trust had begun in his study the night before. Rosamund opened her hand and looked at the ring again. She did not throw it. She did not return it to her finger. "Tomorrow," she said, "I leave for Loxham Park." He leaned forward. "Alone, that?" "Depends on whether your Grace chooses to follow as my husband, or remain in London as the guardian of your reputation." "Do not call me that, Your Grace." "As if I am only that." Her heart moved, and she hated it for moving. "Tonight, that is what you were." The words left him silent. The carriage turned into Grosvenor Square. Rosamund slipped the ring into the pocket of her cloak and looked out at the dark outline of Caverleigh House waiting for them. It no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a place with too many doors and too many people willing to decide which ones should close around her. Rosamund left London before the fashionable world had finished its breakfast. That was the only mercy she allowed the city. At 7:30, Caverleigh House stood under a pale morning sky, its windows blank, its steps washed clean of the previous night's rain, its servants moving with the hushed precision that followed a household wound. Mrs. Bale had arranged the travelling carriage without asking whether His Grace approved. That fact alone told Rosamund something in the house had shifted. Milly stood near the hall table, with a folded shawl in her hands, looking as if she wanted to speak and feared the sound of her own voice. Rosamund paused before her. "You are not responsible for what happened last night." Milly's eyes widened. "I know, Your Grace. Only I keep thinking if I had spoken sooner. You spoke when you were able." "That is not the same as silence." The girl lowered her head, but not before Rosamund saw the relief. Adrian stood at the foot of the stairs in morning black, sleepless and still, with the kind of pallor that did not invite pity, because it had been earned. He had not tried to stop her when she ordered the carriage. He had not entered her room. He had sent only one note before dawn, written in his own hand. "I will not command you to stay in the house where I failed to stand beside you." Rosamund had read it twice, then folded it into the pocket, where her wedding ring still rested, unreturned and ungiven. Now in the hall, Adrian looked at her gloved hands and seemed to understand exactly where the ring was. "The road will be damp," he said. "Mrs. Bale has put extra rugs in the carriage." It was such a useless thing to say that it nearly hurt. "Thank you. Mr. Pemberton remains in London. He will continue the inquiry." "Good. And I have sent to Loxham Park. They will be ready for you." She met his eyes. "For me?" He accepted the correction before she spoke it. "For their Duchess. That was better. Not enough. Better." The footman opened the door. Morning air entered, cool and clean, carrying the sound of distant wheels over stone. Rosamund gathered her skirts. Adrian stepped aside instead of reaching for her arm. At the threshold she turned back. "Do not mistake my leaving for surrender." His face changed. "I would not dare." She believed him, which was inconvenient. Then she entered the carriage, and London began to fall away. The journey to Hampshire took the day through changing light, from the press of streets to open road, from soot-stained brick to hedges washed green by rain. Rosamund did not sleep. She watched fields, villages, church towers, and bare-limbed trees pass beyond the window, each mile loosening Mayfair's grip and tightening another duty inside her. She was not fleeing. She repeated that once, then forbade herself to repeat it again. Truth did not become truer by being rehearsed. In the pocket of her traveling cloak lay 3 objects: her wedding ring, the blue corridor key, and a copy of the Dowager Duchess's ledger entry forbidding verite mordaunt, access to private corridors. In her small traveling case, wrapped inside a handkerchief, lay the grey silk thread. In London, those items had felt like fragments. On the road, they began to feel like a map. Loxham Park came into view near dusk, rising from a sweep of winter lawn and dark yew hedges, its stone front warmed by the last amber light. It was larger than Caverleigh House and less polished, built for inheritance rather than display. Chimneys stood against the pale sky. Lamps glowed in the lower windows. For the first time since her marriage, Rosamund looked at the place, not as the Duke's ancestral seat, but as a house that had been waiting for its Duchess to claim more than the dining table and the charity accounts. The carriage stopped. The butler, Mr. Vale, came down the steps with the housekeeper, Mrs. Orpin, and a line of servants arranged behind them. Rosamund stepped out before the footman could fully lower his hand. Cold air touched her face. "Your Grace," Mr. Vale said, bowing. "Welcome home, home." The word did not settle easily. It stood in the doorway like a guest whose invitation had been lost. "Thank you, Mr. Vale. I will see Mrs. Orpin in the small morning room after I change. Have the household access books brought to me, including any old inventories kept under the late Dowager Duchess." Mr. Vale blinked once. Mrs. Orpin did not. She curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace. There." A second shift. Not dramatic, not sentimental. Authority being answered by obedience, without requiring Adrian's shadow to confirm it. Rosamund changed from her travelling dress into dark wool, drank half a cup of tea, and went to work. The small morning room at Loxham Park had faded yellow walls, a view of the west lawn, and a writing table scarred by generations of practical women. Mrs. Orpin brought ledgers, inventories, and a locked tin dispatch box found years earlier in the East Wing. The late Dowager Duchess kept private correspondence in the East Room, the housekeeper said. His Grace never ordered it disturbed. Then it was not forgotten, Rosamund said, only waiting. Mrs. Orpin looked at her with careful interest. Shall I fetch the key? Rosamund held up the blue corridor key from London. No. But perhaps you will tell me who keeps the East Room key here. I do, Your Grace. Then we shall go together. The East Room lay at the end of a corridor overlooking the old gardens. It smelled of closed curtains, paper, lavender, and dust. Mrs. Orpin unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing Rosamund to enter first. The room had once been a private sitting room, with covered chairs, a writing desk, and cabinets filled with boxes, labelled in the Dowager Duchess's firm hand. Rosamund moved through them with a strange feeling of trespassing upon a dead woman's caution. Then she found the box marked Mordaunt correspondence. Not scandal, not gossip, correspondence. The precision of it chilled her. Inside were letters tied with black ribbon, notes copied from servants, and 3 pages of household warnings, written in the Dowager's hand. Rosamund read standing beside the desk, while Mrs. Orpin waited near the door. Miss Mordaunt asked whether the West Cabinet key travelled with the London housekeeper. Miss Mordaunt's maid seen near private stairs. Lord Felix Arundel inquired after estate obligations beyond his concern. Mordaunt debts rumoured severe. Then, near the bottom of the final page, one sentence stood alone. Never allow Miss Mordaunt near the private corridor keys. Rosamund read it again. The room did not spin. Nothing so theatrical happened. Instead, it became very still. And within that stillness she felt the shape of the plot expand backward through years. Verity had not seized an opportunity in a single reckless hour. She had returned to an old door and found Rosamund standing where she had once hoped to enter. Your Grace, Mrs. Orpin asked softly. Rosamund folded the page with care. This box is to be brought to my room. No one else is to handle it without my instruction. Yes, Your Grace. And Mrs. Orpin? Yes. In this house, if a servant is frightened by a guest, I expect to be told before the guest is protected by manners. Mrs. Orpin's face changed, not with surprise but with recognition. That will be understood. By the time Adrian arrived, night had fallen fully over Loxham Park. Rosamund saw the carriage lamps from the window of the East Room, 2 small flames moving up the drive. She did not go down at once. She finished copying the Dowager's key warning into her own notebook, placed the original back in its box, and only then descended. Adrian stood in the entrance hall, travel-marked, grave, and without the armour of London. He had come alone, without the noise of entourage, without any visible claim except the fact of having followed. Mr. Vale took his gloves. Adrian's eyes found Rosamund at the foot of the stairs. For one suspended moment, no servant moved. Your Grace, she said. The formal address struck him, but he bowed. Duchess, you have come quickly, not quickly enough. That was unwise of him. Honest, but unwise. Rosamund turned toward the small morning room. I have found your mother's box, he followed. When the door closed behind them, she handed him the copied warning, not the original. He read it, and whatever hope he had carried from London hardened into certainty. She knew more than she told me. Or you heard less than she tried to teach you. He looked up. The blow landed, but he did not return it. Yes, Rosamund moved to the writing table and rested her hand on the dispatch box. Verity wanted access before I existed in your life. Felix's name appears in her circle before it appears in our ledger. Their debts were not rumour enough to ruin them, but enough to make a great house useful. Adrian looked at the locked box, then at her. You have done in one afternoon what I failed to do in years. No, I have done what became necessary when your failure reached my bed. His face tightened. She did not soften it. I did not come to be forgiven, he said. Why did you come? Because you asked whether I would follow as your husband or remain the guardian of my reputation. His voice lowered. I came to learn the difference. There were words a wounded heart wanted too badly, and for that reason distrusted. Rosamund turned away before he could see how close those words came. Then learn this first. I will not share a room tonight. I know. You will not question the staff without me. I will not. You will not turn this into a campaign of ducal temper while I become the injured lady in the corner.
No, she faced him.
And you will not ask for the ring. His gaze dropped once to the pocket of her gown, then returned to her face. I will wait until you choose what it means. The quiet answer unsettled her more than pleading. Before she could respond, a sharp knock came. Mrs. Orpin entered with a footman behind her, carrying a sealed message dirtied by hard travel. From London, Your Grace, marked urgent by Mrs. Bale. Rosamund broke the seal. The note was brief, written in the housekeeper's controlled hand. Millie Voss has been seen receiving coin from Lord Felix Arundel's man. Rumour below stairs already turns against her. I await your Grace's direction. Rosamund felt Adrian step nearer. This time she did not move away. They are choosing the easiest person, she said. Adrian read the note over her shoulder, his expression going cold. Then we will make her the hardest one to ruin. Rosamund folded the paper, and for the first time since leaving London, she felt not safe, not healed, but steady. Loxham Park had opened its doors to her. Now she would decide who was protected inside them. By dawn, Rosamund had written 3 letters and sealed none of them. The first was to Mrs. Bale, instructing her that Millie Voss was not to be questioned by anyone below stairs, not to be dismissed, and not to be made the subject of kitchen judgment, disguised as concern. The second was to Mr. Pemberton, ordering him to come to Loxham Park with copies of the London Household Ledger, the scandal sheet, and any inquiry he had made regarding Lord Felix Arundel's debts. The third lay unfinished beneath her hand because it was addressed to no one and accused everyone. She had begun it as a list of facts: the broken clasp, the grey thread, the blue corridor key, the Dowager Duchess's warning, Lady Verity's single pearl, Felix's remark, Millie's fear. By the time she reached the last item, the handwriting had changed. It had become less like a duchess recording evidence and more like a woman refusing to disappear inside someone else's lie. Across the small morning room, Adrian stood near the mantel with Mrs. Bale's urgent note open in his hand. He had read it more than once. His anger was quiet now, which made it more useful. I can have Millie brought here before noon, he said. No. Rosamund sanded the letter to Mrs. Bale and folded it. If she is brought like a prisoner, the House will decide she is guilty before she speaks. Then Mrs. Bale can keep her in London under protection. Under protection from whom? The same servants now whispering because a lord's man made certain they saw her take coin. Adrian looked at her. You believe it was staged. I believe Lord Felix does very little unless it can be observed. She sealed the letter. Send a carriage with Mrs. Orpin's cousin as escort. He is known here, not in London. Millie is to be told she comes at my request, not by your command. You are careful of her pride. I am careful of what fear does to truth. Adrian crossed to the writing table and stopped before he came too near. He did that now, stopping where another husband might have presumed. It was a small respect, but small respects accumulated like stitches. And if she did take the money, then I wish to know why. Many would say why does not matter. Rosamund pressed the seal into the wax. Many have never been poor enough for why to matter more than guilt. His gaze changed. You speak as if you know. My father's house was old, not rich. There is a difference gentlemen often forget until creditors remind them. She set the letter aside and reached for the unfinished list. A servant taking coin may be corrupt, or desperate, or trapped. I will not choose the easiest answer because it suits my rescue. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said, You are a better guardian of this house than I have been. The words landed too close to tenderness, and she did not look up. Then let the house learn quickly. Millie arrived 2 days later, pale from travel and terror, with Mrs. Orpin's cousin seated beside the coachman and a plain trunk strapped behind. Rosamund received her not in the servants' hall, not in Adrian's study, but in the small morning room where sunlight fell across the scarred writing table and no portrait of a dead Caverleigh watched from the wall. Adrian stood by the window, present but not presiding. Mr. Pemberton had come from London that morning, and he sat with his notebook closed in his lap, because Rosamund had told him no ink would touch paper until the girl understood she was not on trial. Millie's hands were clenched in her skirt. "Your Grace, I didn't put anything in your room." The words burst out before she had even finished her curtsy. "I didn't. I swear I didn't." "Sit down, Millie," Rosamund said. "Please." The girl obeyed because obedience was easier than trust. Rosamund poured tea herself. Millie stared at the cup as if it had been placed before the wrong person. "Drink. You have travelled since morning." "I'm not ill, Your Grace." "No. You are frightened." Millie's mouth trembled. "They said I took money. Did you?" Adrian's head turned slightly, but he did not speak. Millie looked at the carpet. "Yes." The word was so small that it seemed to fall before it reached them. Mr. Pemberton's fingers tightened around his closed notebook. Rosamund kept her voice even. "From whom?" "A man who said he served Lord Felix Arundel. I don't know if he truly did, but he wore their colours. He came near the Mews after Sunday service. He said if I wanted my brother kept on at Mr. Hallam's stables, I would keep quiet about what I saw." Rosamund felt the room sharpen. "What brother?" "Tom, Your Grace. He is 16. He has a place there as a stable lad. He hasn't always been quick with numbers, but he is good with horses, and the position keeps him fed." The man said Lord Felix knew the owner. He said, "Tom could be turned off without a character by Monday if I spoke foolishly." Adrian's face went still in the old dangerous way. "And the money?" "He put it in my hand. I tried to give it back, but he said if I refused it, he would tell everyone I had already agreed to lie. Then I would be ruined, and Tom would be turned off besides." Millie wiped her cheek angrily, as if tears were a second accusation. "I didn't spend it. I wrapped it in cloth and hid it under my mattress. Mrs. Bale found it because I was shaking when they asked." Rosamund took this in without softening the facts. Compassion without structure could become another kind of helplessness. "What did you see that night?" Millie closed her hands around the teacup, but did not drink. "A lady near the blue corridor door." "I told you that part. Grey cloak, fur edge, orange blossom scent. But there was something else." Adrian moved one step from the window. Rosamund lifted a hand and he stopped. Millie drew a breath. She was holding something bright. I thought it was a button or a bit of clasp from her cloak. She pressed it into her glove when she heard someone below. Then Lord Felix came up the back stairs. Not all the way, just enough for me to see his face under the lamp. He said, "Is it done?" And she said, "It will be, if the Duchess is as silent as women like her are trained to be." The words moved through the room with more force than any shout. Rosamund did not feel shock. She felt recognition so cold it steadied her. Adrian looked as if every part of him had become an oath. "Why did you not tell us then?" he asked. And though his voice was controlled, Millie flinched. Rosamund looked at him. "Adrian," he closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he faced Millie with visible effort. "Forgive me." That was poorly asked. Millie swallowed. "Because ladies don't answer to girls like me, Your Grace, and gentlemen don't like servants who make trouble above their place. In this house," Rosamund said, "your place is not beneath the truth." Millie looked at her then, truly looked, and the fear in her face cracked into something like painful hope. "I didn't know what to do. You are doing it now." Mr. Pemberton leaned forward. "May I write, Your Grace?" Rosamund turned to Millie. "Only if you consent. His notes will protect you, not trap you." Millie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but please don't let Tom lose his place." Adrian spoke before Rosamund could. "Your brother will not lose honest work because Lord Felix finds fear convenient. I will see to it." Millie's eyes widened. "You'd do that? I should have done such things sooner." Rosamund looked at him, and this time she did not hide that she had heard. The taking of Millie's statement took less than 20 minutes. Rosamund kept it plain. No embellishment, no dramatic language. A frightened servant, a threat, a coin, a grey cloak, a question on the stairs, and Lady Verity's own contempt for the silence expected of women. When it was done, Milly rose as if her bones had remembered their purpose. Rosamund placed Mrs. Orpin's hand on the girl's shoulder. Milly will stay here tonight, as a guest of the household staff, not as someone under suspicion. Tomorrow she may choose whether to remain at Loxham Park for a time or return to London with Mrs. Bale's protection. Milly tried to curtsy and nearly failed. Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me for not being unjust. After the door closed, Adrian crossed the room, then stopped beside the writing table. Felix meant to make her the answer. No, Rosamund said. He meant to make her the end of the question. Mr. Pemberton opened his leather case and removed a cream envelope. This came to Caverleigh House as I was leaving London. Mrs. Bale instructed me to bring it directly. Rosamund knew the dark red wax before he named it. Lady Arundel. She broke the seal. The formal invitation was written in Lady Arundel's hand, but the line below belonged unmistakably to Verity. A private morning reception shall clarify a cruel misunderstanding. Those who value truth should attend. Rosamund handed it to Adrian. He read it and became very calm. She means to accuse you, yes, of setting the pearl in your own bed to disgrace her, and of paying Milly to support the lie. Mr. Pemberton looked grim. If she establishes that suspicion among the right witnesses, Your Grace, the matter becomes more difficult. Then we shall not allow her to establish it without being answered. Adrian's gaze went to Rosamund. I will confront her publicly. No. His expression tightened. Rosamund, no. If you speak first, she becomes the injured woman attacked by a powerful duke. If I speak first, she must answer the woman she tried to reduce. And if she wounds you again? Rosamund folded the invitation and placed it beside Milly's statement. Then this time do not carry me out of the room. The memory of the concert passed across his face. He did not excuse it. I won't. Do you understand what I am asking? Yes, I am asking you to trust me while every instinct tells you to take command. His answer came slowly. Then I will stand beside you and be quiet until you need my voice. It was not a lover's speech. It was better suited to what had broken between them. Rosamund looked at Milly's signed statement, the cream invitation, and the copies of the old warnings spread upon the table. The pieces were no longer scattered. They had become a road back to London. Then send word, she said. The Duchess of Loxham will attend Lady Arundel's reception. Adrian picked up his pen. And the Duke? She met his eyes. He may come if he remembers where to stand. London received Rosamund as if it had been waiting with its ear pressed against a door. By the time the Caverleigh carriage rolled into Mayfair, for Lady Arundel's private morning reception, the streets were bright with winter sun and sharpened curiosity. Adrian sat opposite Rosamund, dressed in dark morning clothes, his gloves resting across one knee, his face composed with such effort that only she could see the strain beneath it. He had said little during the journey from Loxham Park. That silence was not neglect now. It was discipline. Between them on the carriage seat lay a locked leather case containing Milly's statement. The copied entries from the Dowager Duchess's box, the household ledger, the grey silk thread, and the damaged pearl earring Rosamund had taken from her own bed. Her wedding ring was still in her pocket. She had not put it on for the journey. Adrian had noticed. He had not asked. That restraint had become its own language between them. As the carriage slowed before Lady Arundel's house, he looked toward the crowded steps, where footmen admitted guests who had no business attending a private morning reception except that scandal had made them pious. I know where to stand, he said. Rosamund looked at him. Do you? Beside you, not before you. It was the answer she had needed and feared needing. And if she insults me, I will remember that your voice comes first. And if Felix lies, I will let him finish enough of the lie to be answerable for it. She studied him in the dim carriage. That sounds very difficult for you. A shadow of grim humor touched his mouth. You have no idea. The door opened. Rosamund stepped down before any watching face could decide she had hesitated. Lady Arundel's drawing room was already arranged like a courtroom pretending to be a tea party. Chairs had been placed in conversational clusters. A silver urn steamed near the wall. Light fell through tall windows onto pale carpets and restless hands. Lady Bexham was there, along with Mrs. Vale, Lady Pennard, 2 elderly countesses, and several gentlemen who would later claim they had attended, only because their wives insisted. Lord Felix Arundel stood near the mantel, with the bright, overfed confidence of a man who had rehearsed his innocence. Lady Verity Mordaunt stood beside the window in a grey cloak, trimmed with narrow fur, though the room was warm enough that wearing it inside was an affectation. The cloak's clasp had been changed. Rosamund saw that at once. The pearl clasp Milly had described was gone, replaced by a small jet ornament at the throat. Verity wore no earrings, none. Her bare ears were a new performance. Lady Arundel moved forward with a brittle smile. "Duchess, how gracious of you to come, Your Grace." Adrian bowed with enough coldness to freeze the courtesy in place. Rosamund offered her hostess the faintest inclination of her head. "Your invitation suggested that truth would be present. I thought it would be discourteous to let it arrive unattended." A few glances darted between guests. Lady Arundel's smile tightened. "We all hope for clarity." "How fortunate," Rosamund said. "So do I." Verity stepped forward then, her expression gentle enough to be an insult. "Dear Duchess, I hope you understand this gathering is not meant to wound you. It is only that cruel misunderstandings grow when left in darkness. Then, perhaps we should open the curtains." Lady Pennard laughed loudly from her chair. "Quite right. Never liked a dark room. Makes cowards of people with good shoes." Rosamund did not smile, but she felt the room shift a fraction. Verity's gaze slid to Adrian. "Your Grace, surely you agree that false impressions can injure everyone involved." Adrian's posture changed by no more than an inch, but Rosamund felt the old command rise in him. He could end the room with one sentence. He could disgrace Verity by tone alone. Instead, he turned his eyes to Rosamund and remained silent. Trust, she discovered, could be as loud as defense. Verity noticed the silence and mistook it for hesitation. "There was never any impropriety between His Grace and myself," she said, placing one gloved hand over her heart. "I have been injured by rumors as much as anyone." Felix gave a soft sigh. "More, perhaps. A lady's name is fragile, and some would do anything to secure a husband's attention once they fear losing it." Adrian's hand closed slowly around his gloves. Rosamund did not look at him. "Do you refer to me, Lord Felix?" "I refer to no one, Duchess. I only observe that objects can be plied by many hands." "Indeed." She moved toward the center of the room. The guests made way because rank required it, and curiosity desired it. "Then let us speak of hands. Lady Verity, may I ask whether your pearl earrings fasten with hinged clasps or hooks?" Verity's composure held, but her eyes sharpened. What an oddly intimate question. Jewelry often becomes intimate when introduced into a bedchamber. A hush passed through the room. It was the first time Rosamund had named the room herself. Verity recovered with a soft breath. "I cannot recall the exact mechanism. My maid handles such things." "Convenient." Lady Arundel bristled. "Duchess, surely we need not descend into inventories of ornament. On the contrary, we descended there when a pearl was made the subject of public speculation." Felix smiled. "A pearl found in an unfortunate place, if rumor is to be believed." "Rumor is rarely to be believed. It is, however, often to be examined." Rosamund looked again at Verity's cloak. "Your clasp is new." Verity's hand went to her throat. It was quick. "I beg your pardon? The clasp on that cloak, the jet is new. At the concert, if memory serves, your grey cloak was fastened differently." Felix laughed. "Now we accuse ladies of changing their dress. No. I ask why a pearl clasp disappeared after a servant saw a grey cloak near the blue corridor door at Caverleigh House." The room went still. Verity's face did not change enough for most people to notice. Adrian noticed, Rosamund noticed, and then Adrian's gaze dropped to Verity's right wrist. Her glove had shifted when she touched the cloak. Above the edge of the kid leather, a narrow red scratch crossed the pale skin. His eyes lifted to Rosamund, but he did not speak. He only moved one step nearer to her, not in front of her. Beside, Rosamund understood what he had seen without needing to look again. Lady Verity, she said, did you injure your wrist? Verity lowered her hand at once. A pin scratch. Nothing. From your maid, from impatience, or from a broken clasp? Lady Arundel stood. This is outrageous. Lady Pennard rapped her cane once against the carpet. Let her finish. I came all this way in a cold carriage, and I intend to hear something worth the coal. That unexpected command from age and rank silenced the hostess more effectively than Adrian could have done. Felix stepped away from the mantel. Duchess, you tread dangerously close to accusing a lady who has shown you only concern. Rosamund turned to him. And you tread dangerously close to finishing sentences you began in public rooms. His smile faded. I don't know what you mean. At the charity concert, you said some jewels travel more intimately than others. Did you invent the phrase then, or did you rehearse it with the same care? Lady Verity gave to her missing earring. A murmur moved through the room. Verity's eyes flashed. You are unwell with jealousy. No, Rosamund said. I was unwell with silence. I have recovered. Adrian's breath changed beside her, and the sound steadied something in her. Verity looked to him again, trying one last door. Your Grace, surely you won't allow your wife to humiliate herself before your friends. Adrian's voice entered at last, quiet and absolute. My Duchess is not humiliating herself. My Duchess, not an ornament, not an apology, not a woman to be removed from the room. She is asking questions no one here has the courage to ask without hiding behind fans. Lady Bexham lowered hers at once. Rosamund felt the warmth of that defense, but he did not continue. He gave the room back to her. The trust of it nearly undid her more than his words. At that exact moment, the butler appeared at the door, looking deeply unhappy. Mr. Pemberton, solicitor to His Grace, the Duke of Loxham. Lady Arundel turned scarlet. I did not receive a solicitor. No, Rosamund said. You received the Duchess of Loxham. The solicitor attends my evidence. Mr. Pemberton entered carrying the locked leather case. Behind him came Mrs. Bale in sober black and Millie Voss, pale but upright, with Mrs. Orpin at her side. The shock in the drawing-room was almost physical. Servants were not brought into such rooms to be believed. They were brought to carry trays, take cloaks, or be blamed elsewhere. Rosamund looked at Millie, and the girl lifted her chin by a brave inch. Mr. Pemberton placed the leather case on a small table. Your Grace, he said to Rosamund, not Adrian. That detail landed. Rosamund removed the key from her reticule and unlocked the case herself. Inside lay the household ledger, 2 written statements, a folded grey thread, and 2 pearl earrings, 1 whole, 1 damaged. The room leaned toward them without moving. Verity stared at the broken clasp. For the first time, fear crossed her face plainly enough for even Mrs. Vale to see. Adrian saw it too. So did Felix, whose confidence thinned into calculation. There is one detail Lady Verity did not know we possessed, Mr. Pemberton said. Only one? Lady Pennard muttered. Rosamund lifted the damaged earring with its bent clasp resting against her gloved palm. This was the pearl found in my chamber. Its clasp was broken before it was placed there. The earring dropped at the charity concert was whole. They were not accidents. They were stages. Verity whispered, This is absurd. Rosamund looked at her bare ears, her altered cloak, her hidden wrist, and the room of people who had been invited to watch the ruin of a wife. No, she said. Absurdity is expecting a silent woman to remain silent after you put your lie in her bed. The words struck so cleanly that no one spoke. Then Felix moved toward the door. Adrian did not block him. He merely turned his head. Lord Felix, he said very softly. If you leave now, you make pursuit unnecessary. Felix stopped. The room held its breath. Rosamund looked at Mr. Pemberton. Begin with the ledger, Mr. Pemberton opened the household ledger to the marked page and laid it where every titled witness could see the neat line that had nearly ruined a woman. Blue corridor, 9 o'clock, spare key. Curtains inspected, authority. F.A. The room bent toward the page, though no one wished to appear eager. Lady Arundel stood rigid beside the tea table, one hand gripping the back of a chair. Lord Felix remained near the door, too proud to bolt, and too frightened to be still. Lady Verity had not moved since Rosamund lifted the damaged earring. Only her eyes lived, quick and dark, measuring exits, faces, weaknesses. Rosamund watched her and understood with sudden clarity that Verity had always survived by making other people doubt what they had plainly seen. Not today. "Mrs. Bale," Rosamund said. The housekeeper stepped forward. Her black gown seemed severe among the silks, but her composure had more dignity than half the room. "Tell them what the ledger records and what it does not, Mrs." Bale folded her hands. The entry records that the spare key to the blue corridor was issued at 9 o'clock on the night of His Grace's dinner. The purpose was written as curtain inspection. No such inspection had been ordered by His Grace, Her Grace, myself, or the steward. The key was returned by being left outside my room, not by hand. Lady Bexham whispered. "Good heavens!" Lady Pennard leaned on her cane. "Speak louder. I want to enjoy justice while I can still hear it." A strained laugh tried to appear and died at once. Felix lifted his chin. "FA could mean any number of things." "It could," Rosamund said. "If you had not already taught the room to hear your voice in careless remarks." Felix blushed. "I made no order." Mr. Pemberton removed a folded note. "The under-butler, Mr. Hobb, states that the request was carried by a young man wearing Arundel colours. The man claimed he came on Lord Felix Arundel's authority." Mr. Hobb obeyed, because refusing a gentleman's household messenger in the midst of a ducal dinner might have seemed insolent. Rosamund looked toward the guests. That is how such schemes succeed. They borrow obedience from those who cannot afford to question rank. Milly stood near Mrs. Orpin, white-faced but upright. Rosamund turned to her. "Milly, you may speak only what you remember." "Nothing more is required." The girl nodded and stepped forward. "I saw a lady near the blue corridor door. She wore a grey cloak with fur at the edge. There was orange blossom scent. Lord Felix came up the back stairs and said, 'Is it done?' The lady said, 'It will be, if the Duchess is as silent as women like her are trained to be.'" The words cut the room open. Verity gave a soft, wounded sound. A servant repeats what she has been told to say. Adrian's voice entered, low and controlled. "Take care, Lady Verity." Milly looked down, but Rosamund did not let the girl fold into shame. "Look at me, Milly." Milly obeyed. "Did anyone pay you to invent this?" "No, Your Grace." "Did anyone threaten you to remain silent?" "Yes, Your Grace." "A man in Lord Felix's colours told me my brother would lose his place at the stables if I spoke." Felix laughed too loudly. "This is nonsense. Stable boys lose positions every day." Adrian turned his eyes on him. "Not because a lord finds their sisters useful." The words were quiet. Felix stopped laughing. Mr. Pemberton then placed a small packet on the table. The coin found in Milly Voss's possession was traced by date, and marked to a payment made from Lord Felix Arundel's account to one of his men 3 days prior. Felix's confidence fractured. "You had no right to examine my accounts. Your creditors appear to have been less discreet than you hoped," Adrian said. Lady Arundel sank slowly into a chair. Verity looked at Felix with sharp contempt, and that single glance did more than any accusation. It revealed command disappointed by incompetence. Rosamund lifted the whole pearl earring from the table and placed it beside the damaged one. At the charity concert, Lady Verity dropped this earring before witnesses. Its clasp is whole. The one found in my chamber was already broken. A whole clasp falls. A broken clasp must be carried, concealed and placed. Verity's voice trembled beautifully. "You are determined to hate me." "No," Rosamund said. "I was determined to understand you. Hatred would have required less effort." Adrian moved to the table and looked at the damaged clasp. He did not touch it. "At Lady Arundel's soirée, Lord Felix said the Duchess had not broken yet. At the concert, he spoke of jewels travelling intimately." Each remark prepared the room to believe what Lady Verity meant them to believe. "And what is that?" Verity demanded. Her composure was slipping now, not falling but showing the seams. Rosamund answered before Adrian could. "That I was a wife too humiliated to speak. That Adrian was a husband too compromised to defend me. That society would do the rest of your work for you." Verity's eyes flashed to Adrian. "You allowed her to think I mattered because you could never bear to admit that I once did." "No," Adrian said. I allowed silence to stand where truth should have stood. That was my fault. But you mistook my failure as an invitation to injure my wife. Verity's mouth tightened. Your wife. The words were almost a hiss. She was chosen after me. Rosamund felt the room's attention sharpen again, but the old wound did not open as it once had. Adrian turned, not to Verity, but to the room new. The Duchess was not chosen after Lady Verity. She was chosen instead of a woman my mother came to distrust, and I should have removed from my house's circle long before she turned malice toward my wife. Verity's face lost color. Felix stepped back. Do not drag me down with this, he said to her. It was your idea to use the earring. A gasp moved through the room. Lady Arundel covered mouth. Verity turned on him. Fool. One word. Enough. Rosamund felt no triumph, only a still, clean sorrow for the ease with which wickedness abandoned partnership when consequences entered the room. There it is, Lady Pennard said. Even my bad ear caught that. Mr. Pemberton closed his notebook. The matter is clear enough for any reasonable witness. Adrian looked at Felix. Your debts will no longer be softened by any connection to House of Caverleigh. No creditor will hear my name beside yours again. Any threat made against Millie Voss, her brother, or any servant in my household will be answered publicly and with every lawful means available. Felix looked suddenly smaller. You would ruin me over a servant? Rosamund answered. No, over the belief that servants exist to be ruined first. Adrian's gaze remained on Felix. You will leave London by the end of the week. If you remain, you do so without my protection, and under the weight of every statement gathered here. Lady Arundel whispered his name, but Felix did not look at her. He looked at the floor. That was his confession, if not in words. Verity stood alone now. For the first time since Rosamund had known her, no circle protected her, no fan hid her, no phrase made her glitter. And me, she asked. Will you send me away too, Adrian? The use of his name was deliberate, intimate, and desperate. The room heard it. Rosamund heard it without flinching. Adrian's face became colder than Rosamund had ever seen it. You will not use my Christian name again. Verity's lips parted. You cannot cut me off from everyone. No, he said. You did that when you invited everyone to witness a lie and gave them the evidence to condemn you. Rosamund stepped forward. You wanted me sent from society as a silent, disgraced wife. You wanted Caverleigh House to need you as its true companion, its familiar guest, its almost duchess. You forgot that a woman who has been trained in silence has also been trained to listen. Verity's eyes filled, whether from rage or fear. Rosamund neither knew nor cared. You think you have won because he stands beside you today. No, I know I have survived because I finally stood for myself. Adrian's breath changed beside her, but he did not interrupt. Rosamund turned to the room. Every person here heard the whispers. Some repeated them, some enjoyed them, some excused themselves because no name had been printed. You know now whose name was meant. Mine. You know now who placed the wound, not I. Lady Bexham bowed her head first, then Mrs. Vale, then one countess after another. Let silence become acknowledgement. It was not applause. It was better, it was shame-settling where gossip had sat. Adrian faced them all. My wife owes me nothing. She owes this room nothing. I owe her the truth before everyone who helped bury it. I failed to defend her soon enough. I will not fail again by pretending this was only Lady Verity's crime. It was permitted by every silence that made her think Rosamund could be replaced. My wife. Rosamund felt the words, but she did not lean on them. Not yet. She reached into her pocket, drew out the wedding ring, and looked at it once. The room held its breath. Adrian did not move. He did not ask. He did not hope aloud. Slowly, Rosamund placed the ring back on her finger. She did it for herself first, for truth second. For him, only because he had finally learned not to claim what must be chosen. Verity looked away. That was her defeat. Rosamund picked up the damaged pearl earring and placed it in Adrian's open palm. Do not hide this away, she said. Let this house remember what silence costs. His hand closed around it as if it weighed more than gold. It will, he said. Outside, Mayfair carriages waited beneath a pale afternoon sky. ready to carry the corrected story through the same streets that had carried the lie. This time, Rosamund let them. 3 weeks after the drawing room in Mayfair fell silent. Before the truth, Loxham Park opened its doors to Rosamund beneath a sky washed pale by winter sun. The carriage rolled up the long drive, past yew hedges, damp lawns, and bare trees silvered with frost. And for the first time since her marriage, the great stone house did not look like a place she had been admitted to by arrangement. It looked like a place waiting for her decision. Adrian sat opposite her, one hand resting near the leather case on the seat between them. He had said little during the journey from London. There was nothing careless in his silence now. It had changed from absence into attention. He watched the road when she watched the windows. He turned pages of correspondence when she wished for quiet. He answered when spoken to and did not fill the spaces merely to prove himself. That restraint had done more for Rosamund than all of Mayfair's late apologies, though the apologies had come in abundance. Calling cards had arrived at Caverleigh House in a steady little procession of shame. Lady Bexham had written 3 lines expressing horror at having been misled. Mrs. Vale had sent a note so overfull of remorse that Rosamund suspected she hoped to be forgiven publicly enough to repair her own reputation. Lady Pennard had sent only 1 sentence in a large, uneven hand. I was old enough to know better, and pleased enough to hear you prove it. That one Rosamund had kept. The rest remained unanswered in a silver tray on the writing desk. Society, which had fed upon her humiliation, now waited upon her reply. The reversal was quiet. That made it sweeter. As the carriage stopped before Loxham Park, Mr. Vale and Mrs. Orpin descended the steps with the household assembled behind them. Milly stood among the upper maids, not hidden at the rear, but placed properly beside Mrs. Orpin, her cap neat, her face still shy but no longer hunted. Her brother Tom had been transferred to the Loxham stables 2 weeks earlier, where the head groom had reported that the boy was steady with nervous horses and slow only with figures, which seemed to Rosamund an excellent exchange in a stable. Lad. Lord Felix Arundel had left London under the pressure of creditors who no longer found the Caverleigh name useful. Lady Verity Mordaunt had gone to Bath with a widowed aunt whose drawing room, according to rumour, received few visitors and fewer invitations. Rosamund took no pleasure in imagining her loneliness. She took pleasure only in knowing that loneliness had not been purchased with Milly's ruin. Adrian stepped down first, then offered his hand. Rosamund accepted it. The gesture was public, proper, and brief, but his fingers closed around hers with a care that asked nothing and promised much. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Mr. Vale said. This time the word entered without stumbling. Home. Rosamund looked up at the windows, then at the servants waiting in the cold, because tradition required it, and affection had begun to make it less empty. "Thank you," she said. "You must all go inside before Mrs. Orpin blames me for half the household catching cold." A ripple of relieved amusement passed through the line. It was small, but houses were built by small permissions as much as stone. Inside, the changes were subtle and exact. The locks to the private corridors had been replaced. The old spare key system had been ended. Access books now required 2 signatures, one from the housekeeper and one from the Duchess when private rooms were involved. Adrian had suggested the second signature be his, then stopped himself before Rosamund answered. The correction had mattered more because he made it himself. The blue corridor no longer felt like a throat through which secrets moved. Its walls had been cleaned, its lamps repaired, and its service door fitted with a new lock whose key rested on Rosamund's own ring. She walked there after removing her travelling cloak, not because she wished to revisit fear, but because one did not heal a room by avoiding it forever. Adrian came with her only to the corridor's entrance. "Do you want me beside you?" he asked. She considered the question. Once, he would have assumed either command or absence. Now he offered presence as something she might refuse. "Not this time," she said. "Wait there." He bowed his head. "I'm here." She walked the length of the passage alone. The air smelled of beeswax and fresh wood, No orange blossom, no stale fear, no false intimacy. At the end, she turned back. Adrian stood where she had left him, still and watchful, not guarding a reputation, not directing a servant, not rescuing her from a corridor that had already lost its power, simply waiting. Rosamund returned to him and held out the new key. "You may see it now." He looked at it in her palm. "It belongs with you, yes," she said. "But you may know where it is." Something in his face softened. Trust, she had learned, was not surrender. It was chosen knowledge. Over the following days, the East Room changed first. Dust sheets were taken away. Curtains were opened. The Dowager Duchess's boxes were catalogued, not buried. A writing table was brought near the window, and Rosamund began a correspondence fund for women in service who had been threatened with dismissal, false blame, or loss of character. She did not give the charity a sentimental name. She called it the Loxham Household Protection Fund, which Adrian said sounded like a legal instrument, and Rosamund said was precisely the point. Millie helped copy addresses. Mrs. Orpin advised which servants in neighbouring houses might be too frightened to write openly Mr. Pemberton prepared language that would allow assistance without exposing those who sought it. Adrian funded the account without ceremony and without placing his own name above hers. When Rosamund noticed, he said only, "It was your mercy that made justice useful." She answered, "It was not mercy, it was memory." He did not pretend not to understand. The damaged pearl earring was placed in a locked glass cabinet in Adrian's study, not among trophies, but with household records tied in blue tape. Beneath it, at Rosamund's instruction, a small card named the date and the truth plainly. Evidence of false accusation against the Duchess of Loxham, preserved so silence may not be mistaken for peace. The first time she saw it there, she expected pain. Instead, she felt steadiness. The earring had entered her life as a lie in the bed she could not bear to sleep in. Now it rested, where lies were not allowed to dress themselves as discretion. One evening near the end of the third week, Rosamund found Adrian in the East Room, standing before the open window, though the air was cold. He turned when she entered, and for a moment she saw not the Duke of Loxham, not the man who had failed her, not even the husband who had followed her from London, but someone still learning how to remain where love required humility. "You have not answered Lady Bexham," he said. "No." "Will you?" Rosamund crossed to the writing table and touched the stack of cards. "Perhaps. When I decide whether her regret is useful or merely uncomfortable, that is severe, that is learned." He accepted the distinction with a faint nod. She studied him in the lamplight. "And you? Have you had any letter from Lady Verity?" "2. The honesty came without hesitation. I returned both unopened through Mr. Pemberton." Rosamund let the answer settle. "You could have told me sooner." "Yes, I should have. I thought to spare you annoyance, then realized that was the old mistake in better clothing." That almost made her smile. "And now I tell you before I decide for you." The smile came then, small but real. Adrian saw it, and looked as if he had been given a kindness he did not yet trust himself to hold. Later that night, Rosamund stood before the mirror in her bedchamber at Loxham Park. The room had been aired, cleaned, and rearranged at her request. The bed was no longer a monument to absence. A small fire burned in the grate. A vase of winter greenery stood on the table. Her own books rested beside the chair. No stranger's jewel lay on the dressing table. No silence waited inside the sheets. Adrian stood near the door, not entering fully until she met his eyes in the mirror. "May I come in?" he asked. The question was simple. The cost of learning it had not been. "Yes." He crossed the room slowly and stopped behind her chair. Her hair was unpinned, falling dark over her shoulders as it had that first terrible night. For one breath, memory touched the room. Then he lifted the silver backup brush from the table and held it as if it were a fragile thing. "May I?" Rosamund looked at his reflection. His eyes met hers in the glass. "Because I remember what I saw and failed to understand. Because I want one memory in this mirror that doesn't belong to pain. Because I love you, and I know that doesn't require you to hurry." The words entered quietly. They did not demand weeping. They did not ask applause. They stood there, honest and unadorned, waiting for her choice. Rosamund closed her hand around the wedding ring on her finger. "I loved you before you learned to look at me," she said. His face changed as if the sentence had hurt and healed him in the same breath. "Then the rest of my life will be my proof that I don't look away again." She gave the smallest nod. Adrian began to brush her hair, one careful stroke, then another. The sound was soft, steady, almost like rain against glass. Rosamund watched their reflections in the mirror, the Duchess seated with her head high, the Duke standing behind her, not as master of the room, but as the man she had allowed to remain. Outside, Loxham Park settled into the deep quiet of a house, no longer pretending peace and beginning, at last, to build it.